Hello everyone, very good evening and welcome to Byju's Exam Prep. Welcome to another session of International Relations. Before we start, two important announcements. Tomorrow, on the account of Krishna Janmashtami festival, it will be a holiday. We'll not be having any classes tomorrow, so please remember that. So to compensate, we'll have a class on Saturday. This Saturday in the morning from 6 to around 11 a.m. We'll take an extended session. So please, without fail, attend the class on Saturday as well. All right. So two things to remember. Tomorrow is a holiday, so no class for you. And Saturday we'll have an extra class in the morning from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. With this, let's begin our discussion. Let's continue India-Pakistan and India-Afghanistan relations. In the last class, we have covered most of the topics. We were at the end of covering India-Pakistan relations. We were about to wind up this chapter. Let's finish these remaining topics and discuss India-Afghanistan as well. And then we can close this module today itself. If you guys remember, yesterday we covered the entire history of India-Pakistan relations, right? That too in detail. We were also talking about the current state of relations under the Modi government. We discussed how initially Prime Minister Modi also reached out with a hand of friendship towards Pakistan. In the initial years of the Modi government from 2014 to 2016, during this period, we did see a slight improvement in relations. There was a slight improvement because of regular interaction between the leaders of the two countries. So at the leadership level and also at the official level, frequent interactions were happening. And India had launched its neighborhood first policy, saying that we will prioritize our ties with neighboring countries. Then, during the swearing in ceremony of Prime Minister Modi, Nawaz Sharif was also invited, along with all South Asian leaders. That gave an opportunity for India and Pakistan to get closer and to address some of the challenges in the relationship. This was followed by another meeting at SEO BRIC Summit at UFA, where India-Pakistan even issued a joint statement showing their willingness to talk about all contentious issues, including the issues of Kashmir, terrorism, etc. Prime Minister Modi even paid a surprise visit to Pakistan, a personal visit to attend a family wedding in Nawaz Sharif's family. So this was an indication of an ongoing improvement in the relationship. But as soon as we saw the improvement, there was a retaliation from the deep state. Yesterday, I explained how the deep state of Pakistan, that is the Pakistani army and the ISI, how they constantly try to derail relations, especially when it is improving between the two governments. So we saw a series of terror attacks, particularly against military installations. As Pakistan was under tremendous pressure after the 26/11 attacks, it has become difficult for Pakistan to sponsor attacks against Indian cities and India's civilian population. So instead, Pakistan has adopted a new strategy where it is targeting military installations. It has tried triggering more unrest in Kashmir by increasing infiltration from across the border. It has even sponsored local mob unrest against Indian forces. And it has also tried reviving the dormant Khalistan movement. So these are the new developments that we are seeing in the relationship. Right? In the last 13 years, especially, we do see this clear change of path that Pakistan has been taking towards India. So essentially, Pakistan has again become hostile. It has gone back to the same approach. The Uri attacks of 2016 was a turning point. Because even after 2 years of reaching out from India's side, there was no improvement from the Pakistani side. As we discussed in the previous class, in Pakistan, there is a dual power center. The civilian government is just for the sake of it, without any real power. The real authority is wielded by the deep state, by the army and the ISI. So army and ISI will remain relevant in Pakistan as long as there are tensions with India. As long as they can project India as an imminent threat to their country, the army and ISI can easily retain their hold over power without facing questions from the public, without facing internal challenges to their authority. So this has become a repeat pattern. We saw this under Vajpayee era as well, under Manmohan Singh era as well. So after Uri attacks, India decided to downgrade the relations. The relations took a direct hit after the Uri terror attacks because there was a lot of backlash in India. A lot of anger had built up amongst the Indian public that Pakistan keeps sponsoring such attacks, and it pushed the government of India all as well to try and counter Pakistan and retaliate against Pakistan. Because the Uri attacks led to the killing of several Indian soldiers, right? Several Indian soldiers were martyred, and it triggered a major backlash in the country, causing a lot of media and public pressure to build up. So the government retaliated with a diplomatic offensive, coercive diplomacy. Coercive diplomacy was initiated against Pakistan to put pressure on the country for sponsoring terrorism. India's objective was to call out Pakistan at the global level, to provide even more evidence to link Pakistan with terrorism, and to point out that Pakistan is a state sponsor of terrorism. So India adopted this hostile approach, right, to punish Pakistan and isolate Pakistan diplomatically. We implemented the SAARC minus Pakistan approach. We boycotted the SAARC summit, and all the SAARC members supported India, and even they boycotted the SAARC summit at Islamabad. We started sidelining the SAARC grouping, and we revived BIMSTEC in order to keep Pakistan out of regional geopolitics. Right? This became India's strategy. We even brought up the issue at United Nations and at platforms like FATF. We cornered Pakistan for sponsoring terrorism. So this was the diplomatic offensive of India to put that diplomatic pressure from the international community. Along with that, India retaliated by employing its hard power as well. In a rare instance, right, India publicly acknowledged a covert surgical strike that was carried out in retaliation to Uri attacks. See, in the past as well, such cross-border operations have been conducted. This was the first time the government was going public with it, acknowledging that a cross-border covert operation had been conducted. So a surgical strike is basically a precision strike, a targeted strike, usually at terror camps or at enemy locations. So in this surgical strike, the para commandos, the para SF or the para special forces of the Indian Army, they were infiltrated across the line of control into Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And multiple terror launch pads that are located near the LOC were targeted, and several terrorists were killed by the Indian special forces. It was a very successful covert operation, and the government went public with the details, pointing out that Pakistan will face the impact if it keeps sponsoring terrorism. So surgical strikes do have a limited impact, right? It will not wipe out terrorism. It will not change Pakistan's behavior, but definitely it has a short-term impact, right? Because Pakistan knows that the cost has to be paid if it keeps sponsoring terrorism against India. Pakistan's sovereignty was breached by Indian special forces, right? We entered across the LOC and carried out these strikes, precision strikes at multiple terror launch pads that Pakistan had nurtured and supported. In a way, we exposed the presence of terror outfits in Pakistan in front of the world. So as soon as India carried out these surgical strikes, relations took a complete hit. India-Pakistan relations dived from 2016, and till date it has not improved. Because even after that, there have been heightened tensions in the relationship. Few years later, we had the Pulwama attacks in 2019. I'm sure all of you remember the deadly Pulwama attacks carried out again by Jaish-e-Mohammed. Even Uri attacks were carried out by Jaish-e-Mohammed. Right? A CRPF convoy was targeted, and 40 CRPF Jawans were martyred by a suicide bomber of Jaish-e-Mohammed. This attack again triggered a public outrage, and this time, Government of India retaliated by conducting precision airstrikes at Balkot, where multiple terror camps were targeted. The Indian Air Force executed a daring precision operation across the border. This was the first time Indian Air Force was breaching Pakistani airspace since the 1971 war. After 1971, Indian jets had never entered Pakistani airspace. Even during the Kargil conflict, Vajpayee government had given clear instructions to limit and localize the conflict and not expand the conflict. So Indian Air Force was under strict instructions during Kargil war to not cross the border, to not enter Pakistani airspace. So Balkot airstrikes was the first time since 1971 that Indian Air Force breached Pakistani airspace, and this time we went deep inside Pakistan. Because Balkot is located in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is quite far away from the line of control, right? A good 100 plus kilometers inside Pakistani territory. So the Mirage fighter jets, almost a dozen Mirage fighter jets of Indian Air Force, armed with precision laser guided bombs, they breached Pakistani airspace, bombed the terror camps, and came back safely, returned safely to India. So obviously, Pakistan treated this as an act of war, right? Because India had breached Pakistan's sovereignty. We had entered into their airspace and conducted a bombing on their territory. So Pakistan denied the presence of any terror groups, but it treated this as an act of war and retaliated against India. The very next day, in 2019, after Balkot airstrikes, Pakistani Air Force breached Indian airspace, trying to target few locations in Jammu and Kashmir. This led to an aerial dogfight between Indian Air Force and Pakistani Air Force. Right? The Indian Air Force was prepared. We were expecting a retaliation from Pakistan, and the Indian Air Force was expecting a counterattack. So the very next day, when Pakistani Air Force breached the Indian airspace, and when they tried bombing Indian targets, they were repulsed by the Indian Air Force. It led to a direct engagement between the two air forces, and both the sides shot down one jet of each other. India shot down a Pakistani F-16, and Pakistan shot down a MiG-21 of Indian Air Force, and unfortunately, the Indian pilot, Wing Commander Abhinandan, he ejected from the flight and he landed in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So they held Abhinandan briefly as a POW, as a prisoner of war. But later, due to negotiations between India and Pakistan, Abhinandan was released and sent back to India. This period was a heightened period of tensions. This was the closest we had come to a full-fledged war since Operation Parakram. Since 2001, this was the first time that India-Pakistan had come to the brink of a full-fledged conflict. Right? If things had escalated, it could have easily triggered a full-blown out war, that too under the nuclear threshold. Right? But fortunately, mature minds prevailed on both the sides. India made it clear that we had no intention of escalating the conflict. We communicated to Pakistan that our intention was to target terror camps present in your country. We are not going to war with you. Our intention is to conduct a precision strike at one location, and once we executed the Balkot airstrikes, India's objectives were achieved. So India clearly communicated that we are not escalating the conflict. Pakistan also backtracked, and both the sides, they took a step back, thus preventing a full-blown out war or a conflict between the two countries. But the end result was that the relationship was almost destroyed. Since Uri attacks to Pulwama attacks, these 3 years, right? One incident after the other contributed to the derailment of the relations, and this was further aggravated in August 2019 when India revoked the special status of Jammu and Kashmir. The special status given to J&K under Article 370 and Article 35A. This was revoked through constitutional changes that were done, following which Pakistan raised an objection. Pakistan objected to these changes. Pakistan's main concern was the reorganization of Jammu and Kashmir. Because we not only revoked the special status of J&K under Article 370, but the state of Jammu and Kashmir was reorganized. It was broken into 2 union territories. Right? Jammu and Kashmir became a union territory with a legislative assembly, and Ladakh was set up as another union territory. So this invited a backlash from Pakistan and also from China. Both Pakistan and China opposed these changes because they consider themselves as stakeholders in this disputed region. Previously, Jammu and Kashmir had its own constitution, its own autonomy because of Article 370. Now that the autonomy was gone, and since it became union territory, it would come under the direct administration of the union government. Right? Even today, for the J&K Legislative Assembly, elections have not been held. So both J&K and Ladakh, both the union territories, are still being administered by the central government. So as the center got direct administrative control over the disputed areas, both Pakistan and China raised objections to it. Pakistan objected the change in status of Jammu and Kashmir. China had a concern because Aksai Chin is part of Ladakh. If Ladakh comes under the direct rule of the center, China definitely has concerns about India's intentions in Aksai Chin. So as a result, Pakistan and China made this a very big diplomatic issue. They brought up the issue at United Nations. Pakistan brought up the issue at Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And they targeted India for these internal changes that had been done. So relations took a hit because of these changes as well. But India rejected the claims of Pakistan and China. India made it very clear that these are internal decisions of India. This is an internal policy of India. What we do with Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh is India's internal business. Pakistan and China have no stake. They have no locus standi to interfere. So India made this very clear that Pakistan and China cannot raise such objections because this is India's internal matter. They have no business to interfere in our internal matters, and we rejected their claims and strongly opposed the position of Pakistan and China. So since then, relations have remained as it is. It hasn't improved. It has remained at a low point. We barely have any engagement with Pakistan in the last 7 years. Since Uri attack, since 2016, we have barely had any engagement with Pakistan. Apart from few multilateral meetings like SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, right? India recently hosted the SCO Summit. Apart from interactions at such multilateral platforms, we haven't had any diplomatic engagement with Pakistan. There hasn't been any high-profile visit from both the sides. Our leaders and officials haven't met with the Pakistani side. And there has been a complete collapse of relations in the last 7 years. Understood? The only slight improvement we saw was a cultural initiative, which was the inauguration of the Kartarpur corridor. This was the only slight improvement that we saw in this period. The Kartarpur corridor was inaugurated, right, which brings India-Pakistan closer in the cultural domain. I'll explain what the Kartarpur corridor is. I'll come to it. It's very, very important for your prelims. Apart from the inauguration of Kartarpur corridor, India showed support to Pakistan during the recent disasters that have hit the country. Last year, some of you might remember, there were massive floods in Pakistan in the Indus Basin. Hundreds of people were killed. There was massive devastation in Pakistan. So India expressed sympathy, and we even said we are ready to support if required. No support was extended, but we said we are ready to give any support, disaster management assistance needed. So India sympathized publicly and openly and expressed support for Pakistan if needed. That was the only slight improvement we have seen. Apart from that, there hasn't been any major change in the relationship. Is that clear? So this is where India-Pakistan relations stand as of today. Right now, the biggest concern for us in Pakistan is its economic and political situation. Currently, we have a major concern about Pakistan. We are worried about its political situation and its current economic situation. Because Pakistan's economy is on the brink of collapse. It is staring at complete bankruptcy. Is that clear? There has not been any growth. There is a critical shortage of essential resources. Even basic public services have been completely disrupted. There is no electricity, no sufficient water supply. Industrial activity has been completely affected. Even agriculture has been uprooted because of the floods. And upon that, there is massive inflation in Pakistan. Pakistan is dealing with a massive inflationary situation, right? Due to the poor management of the economy. There's been a complete mismanagement of its economy. Inflation levels are so high that the poor people in Pakistan are not able to afford essential items. Now, this is a major concern for India because a complete collapse of Pakistan is a nightmare for India and the world. Right now, Pakistan is seeking support from China, from Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and the IMF. Thanks to China's all-weather friends, its closest friends, China, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, they have given a financial package. They have announced economic packages, given few $1 billion in support. That is why Pakistan's economy is sustaining. And it is working out a bailout package with the IMF. But to receive the bailout package, Pakistan had to show changes with regard to money laundering and terror financing. Without showing any seriousness about terror financing and money laundering, Pakistan wouldn't get any support from IMF or any other international institution. Because Pakistan had been put on the grey list of FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, had again grey listed Pakistan in 2018. This was the third time Pakistan had been grey listed by FATF in the last 15 years. Exactly, in the last 15 years, it has been grey listed 3 times by FATF. Because Pakistan was not serious with regard to tackling money laundering and terror financing. So India, US, France, and other countries, they had used FATF to target Pakistan and they had got Pakistan grey listed. So Pakistan had to show some improvements. It had to arrest few UN designated terrorists. It had to make some legal changes to strengthen its measures against money laundering and terror financing. So Pakistan was forced to make these changes because of the economic pressure, or else it wouldn't have got any support from IMF. So that is why in the last 1 year, Pakistan has made some nominal changes. It has arrested some of the wanted terrorists. It has lodged them in jails, pursuing cases against them. Previously, it had never done this. Even terrorists like Hafiz Saeed, Masood Azhar, even if they were arrested, they would be arrested on other charges, not on terrorism charges. And they would be released very soon from custody. And even if they were in jail, they had a free run. They could do anything. They could easily plan and organize terror attacks, even by sitting in jail. That is the kind of VIP treatment Pakistan has given to globally designated and wanted terrorists. Now that it came under pressure from FATF, because without showing these changes, FATF might blacklist the country. If FATF blacklists a country, it will bring economic sanctions on that country. Nobody will deal with a country blacklisted by FATF. Right now, there are 3 countries in the world that are blacklisted by FATF, and they're all isolated economically. They're all under economic sanctions. No institution will give them loans. No investor will put their money in a blacklisted country. Trade will be completely affected. Exports and imports will be completely affected. Essentially, capital flow will get affected and the country's economy will be shut off from the rest of the world. Do you know which are the 3 countries that are currently blacklisted by FATF? Can you let me know in the comments? There are 3 countries currently under the blacklist. Very good. Iran is one of them. North Korea. And remember, when discussing Myanmar, I had told you that Myanmar also has been blacklisted recently. After the political crisis started, the military took over, right? It established the Junta rule again. Since then, even Myanmar has been blacklisted. These are the 3 countries that are blacklisted by FATF and they are under global economic sanctions. No institution, no investor, no trader, no government or no company will deal with such countries. It is because of this fear, Pakistan was forced to make some changes that allowed FATF to remove Pakistan from the grey list. Recently, Pakistan has been removed from the grey list because of the changes it has carried out. It showed some measures to tackle money laundering and terror financing. Some of the wanted terrorists were arrested and cases are being pursued against them. Because of these changes, Pakistan got a relief. It was removed from the grey list, and now it is able to get some assistance from IMF. But still, its economy is still under threat. It's not out of the risk. There is a possibility of a complete collapse of Pakistan's economy in the future. Politically as well, and even from a security point of view, internal security point of view, Pakistan is facing serious challenges. There is a division between political parties and the army and the ISI. You might have heard about how former Prime Minister Imran Khan was thrown out of power in an unconstitutional manner, how the government was replaced, right? So within Pakistan, there is a division of political support. Imran Khan, through his party, Tehreek-e-Insaf, right, he has a lot of local support. And the army ISI have installed a pro-army government which has its own support base. So internally, political divisions have widened. In the last 1.5 to 2 years, very strong political divisions have come up, where again army and ISI are interfering, meddling with Pakistan's politics. They are removing leaders, throwing out governments and installing favorable governments. Now, this is never good news for any country. That's why I told you Pakistan is a namesake democracy. It's a democracy on the paper, that's it. In reality, it's the army and ISI which really control the power, and they decide who forms the government, who becomes the prime minister. These political divisions could further increase violence. It could create even more social divisions on the ground. So this remains a major concern. It could cause a political collapse. There is an internal security problem in Pakistan. There are many terror groups that are targeting Pakistan today. Basically, Pakistan is paying the price for breeding terrorism all these years. There are several organizations within the country that are attacking the Pakistani state. They want to throw out the Pakistani state and turn the country into a caliphate. You have terror groups like TTP, Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or also known as the Pakistan branch of Taliban. The TTP, which is a Talibani faction, it's linked closely with Afghan Taliban. They have connections with Afghan Taliban. Just like Afghan Taliban threw out Afghan government, and just like they have captured power in Afghanistan and they have formed an Islamic Emirate, similarly, Pakistan Taliban wants to throw the Pakistani state out. They don't support the geopolitics of Pakistani state. The TTP has a major rivalry with the army and ISI. In the last 1.5 years, especially after Afghan Taliban took over in the neighboring country, Pakistan Taliban has become more proactive, and it has been carrying out major attacks in the country. It has carried out repeated attacks against the Pakistani army, the ISI, and the Pakistani government. Its goal is to throw out the Pakistani state, throw the army and ISI out, topple the government, and capture power, just like Afghan Taliban did in Afghanistan. So this increases the security threats. Plus, you have Baloch groups, Baloch rebel groups. In Sindh as well, Sindhi nationalism has increased. There are a lot of internal divisions. The other terror groups nurtured by Pakistan, even they cannot be trusted. Terrorist outfits like Al-Qaeda, Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Hizbul Mujahideen, even they cannot be trusted entirely. Tomorrow, these groups might also turn against Pakistan. Then you also have the rise of Islamic State in Afghanistan-Pakistan belt. In the border areas, in the tribal belt of Afghanistan and Pakistan, ISIS branch has come up called ISIS-K or ISIS Khorasan. This branch of ISIS, it wants to capture all the territory from Afghanistan to Pakistan to parts of India and turn that into an Islamic caliphate, into an Islamic state called the Khorasan province. So these multitude of terrorist groups that are operating here, they all pose a threat to the survival of Pakistani state. And this is Pakistan's own creation. It is paying the price for breeding radicalism and extremism for 70 plus years. Because see, when you sponsor radicalism and when you directly nurture extremist groups, these groups will go out of control. They will come back to bite the same country which sponsored them. Almost every country has had such experience. Any country which has sponsored extremism, it has lost control over these organizations and they come back to hurt the country which actually created them. Look at how Al Qaeda, Taliban targeted the United States. It was the US which created Afghan Mujahideen. We studied that yesterday. It was the byproduct of Afghan Mujahideen, that is Taliban and later Al Qaeda, which carried out attacks against Western countries. Same with Saudi Arabia, Iran, Israel, Russia, European countries. Even when they have sponsored extremist groups, most of these groups have gone out of control and they come back to attack the sponsoring countries itself. Even India has had one such experience with LTTE. India played a pivotal role in sponsoring LTTE at one point. Later, LTTE turned against India, carrying out attacks against India itself. Right? So this is why covert wars are dangerous. That's why India has largely stayed away from sponsoring extremist outfits in the last 20 to 30 years. At least as far as we know, in the official domain, the public domain, we have not been involved in directly sponsoring extremist organizations because we know the cost, we know the price. So today, Pakistan is paying that price for breeding terrorism for so many decades. There are multiple internal threats and it is not able to stabilize the country. So there is an economic crisis, there is a political crisis, a security crisis, there are many social problems. So Pakistan is a classic recipe for disaster. It's on the verge of collapse, and this is what India doesn't want. The world doesn't want this, right? As much as you can hate Pakistan, right? You still don't want Pakistan to fail. Trust me on this. If Pakistan were ever to collapse, India, for example, right? India would be the first country to do anything possible to support the Pakistani state and stabilize Pakistan. Because if there is a collapse in Pakistan, the concern is about nuclear weapons. What if radical outfits, terrorist outfits get hold of nuclear weapons, and what if they start using them? Of course, India would be their primary target along with Western countries. So this is a nightmare scenario that countries have been preparing for since 1990s. Since Pakistan deployed nuclear weapons, the biggest fear for India and the world is a complete collapse of Pakistani state. Right? If that collapse were to happen, if terror groups were to get a free hand, right? You never know. They might get hold of nuclear arsenal of Pakistan. Because within the Pakistani armed forces and intelligence agencies, there are radical elements. Within ISI, within the army, within the navy, there are radical elements who align with terrorist outfits. They treat terror groups as their brothers, as their brother organizations. That is the sentiment that exists here. So if the state were to collapse and lose control, it would be an absolute nightmare for the entire world. So that is why we closely watch the economic situation, the political and security situation in Pakistan. We keep a close eye and we work with other partners. We work with US, we work with China as well. Even China has a concern about Pakistan's collapse. China is worried about the presence of terror groups in the region because they are a threat to Chinese investments. Some of the terror groups present here, they have connections with other terror groups in Central Asia and Xinjiang, which are a threat to China. We will study them in the next chapter. So China also, even though it's a best friend of Pakistan, an all-weather friend, China has these concerns about Pakistan's stability and the presence of so many radical terrorist organizations in the region. So this is the complex, difficult equation that we are dealing with. There are no easy answers here. I know many of you have questions like, how do we deal with Pakistan? How do we stop terrorism? How do we resolve Kashmir issue? How do we get back POK? I know these are the basic questions many students have, but trust me, they don't have easy answers. This is a very complex geopolitical situation. Trust me, it will not be resolved for many more decades to come. I'm not being pessimistic, I'm being realistic. based on the current situation that exists, Kashmir issue is unlikely to be resolved. Status quo will remain. And there is no question of India taking back POK. It is out of the question. Because the only way you can take POK back is by going to war with Pakistan. And no Indian government is foolish enough to go to war with Pakistan, because Pakistan is still a formidable military power. And it possesses nuclear weapons, including tactical battlefield nuclear weapons. If Pakistan were to suffer a setback in a conventional war, you never know if local military commanders who have control over small nuclear warheads, tactical battlefield nuclear weapons, they might decide to employ nuclear weapons in the battlefield. So if that situation were to come, then what will India do? Will we fulfill our promise of second strike? Right? In our nuclear doctrine, we have said that we will not carry out the first strike. We have a no first use policy. But if there is a nuclear strike on India, we will retaliate with full force. We guarantee a second strike to wipe out the other country. That is India's nuclear doctrine. So tomorrow, if there were to be a war like this, hypothetically, and if Pakistan is on the back foot, because conventionally it is weaker than India, right? In a conventional war, India is likely to gain an edge over Pakistan. So when Pakistan feels it's about to be defeated, what if the army and some local commanders decide to deploy battlefield nuclear weapons? What if they use the tactical warheads, the smaller nuclear warheads in the battlefield against Indian soldiers? So this has been a challenge, a dilemma for all the Indian governments. That is why after terror attacks, when we exercise the military option, we are very, very cautious. The governments think 10, 20 times regarding the possibilities. Because in actual war, things can go very wrong. There could be miscalculations, there could be miscommunication, wrong assumptions, right? You can't control the outcome of a war. See what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. Russia appeared to have a clear edge at the beginning, but the war is still a stalemate. And in fact, Ukraine has revived itself and fought back effectively and pushing back Russia, launching counter attacks into Russia. So since you never have that clarity in a conventional war, and since we are worried about breaching that nuclear threshold, for India, this will always remain a dilemma, a major challenge. It will be a complex issue. It will be a irritant in the neighborhood. Pakistan will be an irritant in the neighborhood. So then what should be our approach? If we can't resolve Kashmir issue as of now, if there is no question of taking back POK, right? If we can't put an end to terrorism, then what do we do, right? So let's discuss the approach, right? What are priorities of India? What challenges do we face? And that will basically complete this chapter. So before I discuss the way forward, let me give you some basic points about Kartarpur corridor. Please note down this topic. It's very important for your prelims especially. Kartarpur corridor is a major cultural initiative that was launched recently in 2019. Is that clear? In the Punjab province, the British era Punjab province, that is before partition, before independence, there were two important religious shrines, very sacred Sikh pilgrimage centers. One of them is Dera Baba Nanak Gurudwara in the Gurdaspur district of India. In the Punjab state of India, near the border, you have the Gurdaspur district. There you have a very sacred Gurudwara, which is Dera Baba Nanak. Just few kilometers on the other side, around 6 to 7 kilometers, in Pakistan, at a place known as Kartarpur, you have a very sacred Gurudwara, the Darbar Sahib Gurudwara in Kartarpur. Please remember the names. Dera Baba Nanak in Gurdaspur on the Indian side, Darbar Sahib in Kartarpur on the Pakistani side. Both the Gurudwaras are extremely sacred in Sikhism. Sikhs consider both Gurudwaras to be very sacred because this is where Guru Nanak, the founder of Sikhism, is believed to have spent his final years, his last years before his passing away. He spent most of his time at Dera Baba Nanak in Gurdaspur, and he finally passed away at Kartarpur in Pakistan. So there is a lot of religious, cultural significance attached to these shrines. But unfortunately for the Sikh community, the partition delivered a big blow to them. Partition of Punjab, the drawing of India-Pakistan boundary, the Ratcliffe line, was a devastating development for the Sikh community. It hurt their cultural, religious sentiments because the hard border that came up between these arch rivals shut off the route for pilgrims, and they could never ever access Kartarpur Gurudwara. All right? So Sikh pilgrims from India and around the world, the only option they had was to view Kartarpur Gurudwara through binoculars on the Indian side. If any of you have visited Gurdaspur, right, you would know what I'm talking about. Before this corridor was created, Sikh pilgrims in India and from around the world, because Sikh community has a very strong diaspora, right, in US, in Canada, in Australia, in Europe. So all the pilgrims would come to India, and from the Indian side, they had to see Kartarpur Gurudwara through binoculars installed by the Punjab government. Because the only option for them was to apply for a Pakistani visa. And given the state of relations between India and Pakistan, either it would be impossible to get the tourist visa, right, on security grounds due to a lot of doubt and suspicion. Both sides, they don't give visas easily to each other. Even India does not give visas easily to Pakistanis, right? Even on humanitarian grounds, medical grounds, lot of scrutiny is done, and only then visas are issued. Same with Pakistan. So both countries, they view each other's tourists with a lot of suspicion. The intelligence agencies, they keep a very close watch on them, right? Even before granting every single visa, thorough background checks are run by both the countries. Because there is always a suspicion that the incoming person could be a spy or an agent. So given the state of relations and the complete breakdown of diplomatic relations, getting a Pakistani visa for Indians was a nightmare. Even if somehow you manage to get the visa, travel would be a problem. The Gurudwara is just 6 kilometers from the border. You can literally walk. You can walk in a couple of hours from the border. For that, you have to go to a third country and then take a flight to Islamabad. Because for many years, we didn't have direct flights between India and Pakistan, right? For a short period, we had train and bus services, but even they have been suspended. So tourists, they had to go to, let's say, Saudi Arabia or UAE or other countries and then take a flight to Pakistan and then reach Kartarpur. So because of the travel involved and the logistical nightmare and the security problems involved, pilgrims would never travel to Kartarpur. So from a long time, the Sikh community had this demand. From 1960s, Sikh community had been demanding a visa-free corridor that would connect Gurdaspur with Kartarpur, so that without the need for a Pakistani visa, the pilgrims can go, pay their respects and come back. But this corridor could never be created because of the state of relations between the two countries. The constant rivalry, hostilities, wars and tensions and terror attacks kept derailing this initiative. But finally, in 2018, there was progress, because the 550th birth anniversary of Guru Nanak was approaching. In 2019, the Sikh community was preparing in India and around the world to celebrate the 550th birth anniversary of Guru Nanak Dev. So this brought a lot of pressure on both India and Pakistan. And finally, the Modi government and then Imran Khan government, they reached out to each other and they signed a historic agreement. Prime Minister Modi and Imran Khan signed a historic deal to create a visa-free corridor between the two countries. The construction took around 1 year. The construction was fast-tracked on both the sides to ensure that the corridor is opened before the birth anniversary celebrations. So very quickly, in record time, both the sides constructed the infrastructure that was needed. They built the terminals, passenger terminals on both the sides, just like you have an airport or a seaport terminal, right, or a land port facility. Similarly, passenger terminals have been created on both the sides of the border. So the arrangement is that Indian tourists, they can apply to the Ministry of External Affairs. There is a website created for this by the MEA. All of us can visit, right? Let's say you want to visit Kartarpur. You log into this website created by MEA, provide all your details, provide all the necessary documents, and MEA will forward the details to Pakistan. Following this, a travel pass will be issued, not a visa. There is no need for a visa. 1 day travel pass is issued, a travel document. So you go to the terminal on the Indian side at Gurdaspur, and from here you'll be taken across the border. You cross the border on foot, and you'll be greeted by the Pakistani immigration on the other side. And once you show the travel pass, you'll be taken inside, right? There will be buses and golf carts available where passengers will be ferried to Kartarpur. And you'll get around few hours to pay your respects, and you have to come back on the same day. It's mandatory. It closes by 3 p.m. You go in the morning, reach Kartarpur by afternoon, pay your respects, and you come back on the same day. So it's a 1 day travel pass, a visa-free 1 day travel corridor, and it's only for Indian pilgrims. Is that clear? Pakistanis on the other side can't come to India. Foreign citizens can't apply. Only Indian citizens, Indian tourists can apply. You go to Kartarpur and come back on the same day. Is that clear? So this is the unique travel arrangement that has been created to help the Sikh community. And please note down that the corridor has been built over the Ravi River. The Ravi River passes in between Dera Baba Nanak and the Kartarpur Gurudwara. Is that clear? So the corridor passes over the Ravi River. A very important fact for your prelims. But one drawback is that there is a practical problem which has come up. Even Sikh pilgrims are hesitating to go. Actually, around 1,000 pilgrims can be allowed in a day. The capacity is up to 3,000 pilgrims if required in a single day. But less than 100 people are applying every day because the pilgrims are worried, especially the Sikh community, those who are settled abroad in Western countries. They are worried about Pakistan stamping their passport. A Pakistani stamp on your passport is a red flag. If you take your passport with a Pakistani stamp and apply for a US visa or a Canadian visa or a European visa, immediately alerts will go out and high chances are there that your visa will be rejected. Since most of the Sikhs keep traveling to European countries, to Canada, Australia, and US, they're all worried that Pakistan might stamp their passport. Even though it is supposed to be a visa-free corridor, Pakistan has reportedly started stamping the passports. This is not what India had agreed to. Stamping should not have been there. It was supposed to be a 1 day travel pass. Stamping is done when you get a visa, right? There's no visa involved. But still, Pakistan has started the practice of stamping the passports, which has become a very big deterrent. So if you're planning to visit any Western country, please don't go to Kartarpur. Earlier, I told you, all of us can visit Kartarpur, but don't visit Kartarpur if you're planning visit to Western countries. You will not get their visa. Chances are very, very high that your visa will be rejected. Is that clear? So as a result, the utility of the corridor has gone down. Even though it's a great initiative, not many people are using it because of the fear of getting rejected by other countries. Got it? So this is something you should understand about Kartarpur corridor. So I hope everything is clear. Now coming to the last point. What should India do going forward? What should be our priorities? What are the challenges? Are there any issues that we can try and resolve? Let's discuss this 10-15 minutes and we'll wrap up this chapter. The first priority for India, of course, is to put an end to cross-border terrorism. We have to push Pakistan to give up terrorism as a weapon. This is India's topmost priority, right? Cross-border infiltration that happens across LOC and the constant state support Pakistani agencies are giving to terror groups against India. This has become a security challenge, the biggest security challenge for India. So it's highly unlikely Pakistan will give up. Pakistan will not give up its weapon against India. This is Pakistan's trump card against India. For 50 years, it has used terrorism as a proxy to destabilize India, to put India on the back foot. So there is no way Pakistan will give up this weapon. Even if it comes under a lot of international pressure, it will find other ways and other methods of continuing its covert war against India. So it will create more unrest in Kashmir. It will try to revive Khalistan movement in India and abroad. Right? It will back the Sikh extremists, the Khalistani extremists, to revive the Khalistan movement. There are many other internal issues in India which can be exploited by Pakistan. Right? So Pakistan is constantly working on this. This is unlikely to be addressed any time soon. But of course, for India, the priority is to tackle terrorism that comes from Pakistan. So we have to improve our intelligence gathering, step up our counter-terrorism efforts, and collaborate with like-minded countries to counter terrorism and put pressure on Pakistan. That is the only option we have. Since Pakistan is not going to give up, we have to improve our intelligence gathering and counter-terrorism capabilities. We have to prevent the terror attacks. We have to break up these terror modules. And we have to work with friendly countries. We have to work with US, European countries, and other like-minded countries to counter terrorism, to share intelligence, and jointly put pressure, international pressure on Pakistan. So that is why using platforms like UN, FATF can be effective. And that is the approach India has been following. All right. We may not be able to end terrorism, but at least we may be able to reduce the extent of terrorism. Because after Mumbai attacks, we have seen a change. Right? We haven't seen a major attack on an Indian city after Mumbai attacks. That's because of the pressure India has put on Pakistan along with other countries. So on those lines, we can work and we can try to at least reduce the extent of terrorism. And Pakistan has to be punished when necessary. Pakistan has to be brought under pressure when necessary. We should engage. We should be open to talks. We should be ready for friendly relations. At the same time, we should be ready to punish the country as well and impose a cost when it misbehaves with India. Either through surgical strikes, air strikes, covert intelligence operations. So we have to use a mix of covert operations and rely on military options to punish Pakistan when necessary. This will act as a deterrent. This will not end terrorism for you. Just because you carry out one surgical strike, one air strike, Pakistan will not stop terrorism. At least it will become a deterrent because the cost will increase for Pakistan. It will come under more scrutiny. There will be a lot of pressure on Pakistan. Questions will be raised within the country as to how India breaches Pakistan's sovereignty. Right? So this pressure will deter Pakistan from launching major attacks against India. So there will be a deterrent impact of using military options when needed. We are not calling for a war. We are asking for precision strikes, targeted strikes, when necessary, targeting the terror camps. We need not target Pakistani civilians. We need not target Pakistani army. Right? We are not targeting Pakistani state. We should target the terror camps, target the terrorists, their financing infrastructure, target the terror launch pads. This is justifiable under international law. Even under international law, we can justify these attacks against terror installations as they pose a credible threat to India. So once in a while, punishing Pakistan when it carries out attacks against India can establish a strong deterrent. This should be followed by regular engagement. We should work with international community and put pressure on Pakistan. If it shows a change in behavior, then we should be ready to take that. If it shows a friendly outreach, if it is ready for engaging with India, we should not turn the other side. We should not be so petty, right? We should be open for engagement if Pakistan is also ready for an honest engagement. So the focus should be on improving trade and people-to-people relations. Because many families have been disconnected because of partition. In Kashmir, in Punjab, thousands of families have been separated for decades together, right? This is a humanitarian situation. Believe it or not, many Indian families go to Kartarpur to meet Pakistani relatives whom they have never met since independence. Since Pakistanis briefly get 3-4 hours at the Gurudwara where Indians can meet Pakistanis. You can interact there at the Gurudwara. So many families on both sides, they plan in such a way that they plan together, they reach Kartarpur at the same time, and these families which were torn apart and separated, they have started meeting after decades because of Kartarpur corridor. So we should work on more such engagement, improve border trade, resume connectivity. If things improve, if Pakistan shows an improvement, resume the bus and train services, rebuild connectivity, establish air connectivity, relax visa norms. So tourists, traders, businessmen can travel, and that could improve the economic and cultural relations. We have an integrated check post at the Wagah Atari border. At the Wagah Atari checkpoint, we have a ICP, a integrated check post built for trade, border trade between the two countries. We should fully utilize the integrated check post for increasing border trade. Right? There are many joint projects that have been planned. We'll discuss that later at the end of this chapter after we cover Afghanistan. I'll show you some projects, connectivity projects, where India, Pakistan can work together for the common development of the region. So that will improve economic relations, it will improve connectivity, it will promote cultural relations and people to people ties. That is what will bring the country together, the two countries together. Right? This is, of course, our long-term vision. And of course, if the situation is ideal, we would like to resolve standing disputes through negotiations. There's no other option, not through war. India will not instigate the war. If Pakistan brings a war on us, India will fight back. But as far as possible, we would like a peaceful resolution of the standing disputes, be it Kashmir or Siachen or Sir Creek. But as I told you, Kashmir dispute is so complicated. There is such a complex history behind it. No side will step back. Neither will India give up its claims, neither will Pakistan give up its claims. Ideal solution is to work out status quo. Ideal solution is to turn LOC into the permanent border and allow both sides to keep the respective territories, or provide for some kind of autonomy on both the sides and ensure that people of Kashmir on both the sides benefit, whereas India will have control on this side of Kashmir and Pakistan will have some control on the other side of Kashmir. So some kind of arrangement will have to be worked out, but right now it is highly unlikely to happen. Trust me, take it from me, in the next 30-40 years, there will be no resolution of this issue unless something dramatic changes. Right? Unless there is a dramatic change in India or Pakistan, this situation is unlikely to change. So ideally, we should hope for a peaceful settlement, a negotiated settlement, where we can talk, sign an agreement, and settle the dispute forever. Right? It's in the good benefit of both the countries. Siachen is out of question. As we discussed, India has rejected demilitarization. We have considered it, but India has ruled it out given Pakistan's behavior. Since Pakistan can't be trusted, India has ruled out any demilitarization of Siachen. So the only thing that remains is Sir Creek. So what is the Sir Creek issue? Sir Creek issue is actually a very minor issue. It can be resolved if Pakistan shows maturity and balance in its position. Sir Creek is this estuary present in the Run of Kutch area between Gujarat and Sindh, between Gujarat of India and the Sindh province of Pakistan. You have a marshy land, you have a wet marshy area called Run of Kutch. This is where the Indus drains into the Arabian Sea, and there are many estuaries and backwaters present here. So the international border, which is the settled boundary, it comes till here, till the end of Gujarat and Sindh. But at the last point, where the boundary is supposed to meet Arabian Sea, we have a dispute over Sir Creek. India's position is that, can you see the orange line here? The dotted orange line in between? This is the claim line of India. India's claim is in accordance with UN Convention on Law of the Sea, as it involves a maritime component, and the drawing of boundaries here could also influence your boundaries of territorial waters and exclusive economic zone. Under the UN Convention on Law of the Sea, there is a principle, there is a doctrine on how boundaries have to be drawn in such water bodies. If a water body is marking a boundary between two countries, there is a UN convention, right, that deals with law of the sea. It defines how boundaries have to be drawn. This is defined under the Thalweg doctrine or the Thalweg principle, which is recognized under UN Convention on Law of the Sea. According to Thalweg principle, if this is the water body between two countries, assume it's a river or assume it's a estuary or a backwater. If this is the boundary between two countries, then according to Thalweg principle, the boundary, the international border should pass in between the navigable channel. So both countries will get a fair division, a fair share. It's as simple as that. It's very simple and fair. This is recognized under UN Convention on Law of the Sea as well. According to Thalweg principle or Thalweg doctrine, if there is a water body marking the boundary, the border, the exact border will pass in between the navigable channel. So both sides will get almost 50% of the water body. So it's not unfair to anyone. This is what India supports. We are very fair. We are not asking for anything extra. We are asking for the fair division of the boundary here as per internationally recognized principles like Thalweg principle. But Pakistan, as usual, creates problems. Pakistan rejects the Thalweg principle, rejects India's claims, and it is claiming the whole Sir Creek to itself. Can you see the green line here towards India? This green dotted line? This is the claim line of Pakistan. This is Pakistan's claim line, the green line. So basically, Pakistan is claiming the entire Sir Creek to itself. It wants the whole Sir Creek region. Now, obviously, it is unacceptable to India. This is unfair. We have internationally recognized principles, right? Common sense tells you that fair division requires 50-50% division. And that's what India is asking for. We are not asking whole Sir Creek to ourselves. But Pakistan has this unreasonable position that it wants the whole Sir Creek to itself. That is why India objects to it. So this remains another standing dispute. But honestly, if better sense prevails, especially on the side of Pakistan, this is an issue which can be easily resolved. It's very simple. The international border from here should pass in between as per Thalweg principle. Both India and Pakistan will get a fair share, and accordingly, maritime boundaries will also get defined. It's as simple as that. But Pakistan, as usual, creates these unnecessary problems and situations, and the issue persists, and it remains a flashpoint. During wartime, during tensions, Sir Creek area becomes very sensitive because the troops go on a high alert. The BSF, that is responsible for guarding the boundary, right? The Army and Air Force, they all go on a high alert whenever there are tensions between India and Pakistan, because this is a delicate, sensitive area, as it's a disputed region. So it's an unnecessary dispute that remains. We can actually resolve it. All that is required is some common sense on the side of Pakistan and also some maturity on the Indian side. So if both countries work together, Sir Creek issue can be resolved. That's why it is called a low-hanging fruit. It's one of the low-hanging fruits in the relationship. We may not be able to pluck Kashmir. Kashmir is a very high-hanging fruit. Maybe even Siachen is difficult given Pakistan's behavior. But Sir Creek is definitely a low-hanging fruit. We can pluck the fruit, which means we can resolve the dispute very easily with the right effort from both the sides. Is that clear? So these are the key points you have to be aware of regarding India and Pakistan. I have covered all the possible issues. Of course, with regard to terrorism, money laundering, terror financing, we need to go a little bit in depth, but that's not for international relations. That is for internal security. In internal security, we'll have a detailed discussion on some of the same topics. We will look at border security again. We'll look at terrorism, Khalistan movement, Kashmir terrorism, Pakistan's role in sponsoring them, right? We'll discuss counter-terrorism. We'll discuss FATF and money laundering in detail. We'll talk about Pakistan's role in terror financing. All those topics will get covered in complete detail under internal security. Now we have covered it briefly, right? That's enough for IR, but we'll cover it in detail under internal security. So this completes my discussion on India and Pakistan. We've covered all the required topics. This is more than sufficient. So whatever questions you have, please bring it up. I'll take some doubts. And after that, we will start with Afghanistan. I'll open few fresh slides and we will resume our discussion on Afghanistan. Remember, yesterday I had given you an introduction as to what happened in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. This is something we studied yesterday in detail. I'll give you a summary again and we'll discuss what happened after this. We'll understand where Taliban came from, what happened in 1990s, what relations does India have with Taliban, right? What happened after 9/11 attacks, what kind of relations India had with the Afghan civilian government, and what happened recently in 2021. How did Taliban come back to power, right? What is the current state of relations between India and Afghanistan? That is something we have to cover, and let's do this after covering your questions and doubts. Okay, first question. Vivek is asking, sir, why Iran is blacklisted? Iran has been blacklisted because, one, it has been running an illegal nuclear weapons program, which is opposed by US and Israel and Western countries. And also Iran is accused of sponsoring terrorism. Iran apparently sponsors few terror outfits against Israel. You might have heard of terror groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. Hamas is a terrorist organization operating in the Gaza Strip of Palestine. It's a Palestinian terror outfit targeting Israel and US. So Iran sponsors Hamas. Then Hezbollah is another terror outfit operating from Lebanon, the neighboring country of Israel. So Hezbollah also targets Israel and American interests. So these groups are allegedly sponsored by Iran. So since Iran has become a state sponsorer of terrorism, it has violated money laundering norms and terror financing norms, it has been blacklisted by FATF. Is that clear? North Korea also has been blacklisted because it has violated the non-proliferation treaty. It has developed nuclear weapons illegally, tested them against international law, and it is constantly threatening US, Japan, and South Korea. So because of its irresponsible behavior, North Korea also has been blacklisted by FATF. Because these three countries, Myanmar, North Korea, and Iran, they have not shown any interest to tackle money laundering and to counter terror financing. That is the reason why they have been blacklisted. Next, Sakshi is asking, if USA knows about Pakistan making nuclear weapons, then why USA didn't stop Pakistan as it wanted to stop India's nuclear program? See, in the 1970s and 1980s, that is when India-Pakistan accelerated their nuclear weapons program. See, we tested the weapons in 98. Doesn't mean they were developed overnight, right? This was a long journey. There's a 50-year history behind our nuclear weapons program. But we accelerated our weapons program, particularly in the 1970s and 1980s. India's program was mainly a response to China's nuclear program. For India, China has been the bigger threat. Primarily, our nuclear program has been designed to counter the Chinese nuclear program and to build deterrence against China's nuclear weapons. So if India becomes a nuclear power, obviously Pakistan also joins the race. So Pakistan tried competing with India to build its own nuclear arsenal to build deterrence against India, just like India was building deterrence against China. So in this equation, China started assisting Pakistan. China started leaking nuclear secrets. It started supplying nuclear material, nuclear plans, and nuclear technology to Pakistan. India knew this. Many countries were aware of this, including the United States, right? And yet, US did not stop Pakistan from becoming a nuclear power. Whereas US targeted India to disrupt our space and nuclear program. The reason is Cold War rivalry. We studied this under India-Bangladesh, right? We studied this under India-Pakistan as well. During the Cold War, especially after 1971, India had aligned with Soviet Union. When the Americans supported Pakistan in the 71 war, and they threatened India, Indira Gandhi clearly abandoned non-alignment and India aligned with Soviet Union. So in the Cold War, we made a choice. We moved away from Western countries, especially the US. US became hostile to us. So we took the support of Soviet Union. So India and US were on the opposite sides of the Cold War. So US had an interest to target India, to derail our space and nuclear program because it was directly supported and backed by the Soviet Union. Soviet Union had played a big role in supporting our space and nuclear program. Whereas Pakistan was an ally. Pakistan was always an American ally. Even when they knew that China was helping Pakistan to build nuclear weapons, they remained silent because they always believed until 1990s that Pakistan is a counterbalance to India. If India alone builds nuclear weapons in the region, it will change the balance of power in India's favor. So to balance India, to counterbalance India, the US silently allowed China to help Pakistan as it believed that Pakistan will be a counterbalance to India. So this was a result of Cold War dynamics, Cold War geopolitics. Muhammad is asking, is Sir Creek a strategic location? Obviously, right? It's part of the Arabian Sea, right? It touches the Arabian Sea, and there are plenty of resources present, right? And any such border location will be a strategic location since it has implications for maritime boundaries as well. So Sir Creek area is definitely a strategic location. Femina is asking, if Pakistan is trapped in such a huge economic crisis, then why India is not going to support Pakistan financially? See, what is the reason for India to support Pakistan right now? Pakistan has never favored India. It has always created problems for India. It has fought multiple wars, created unnecessary disputes, and continues to sponsor terrorism against us. So the right position or the right environment doesn't exist, the right situation doesn't exist for India to support Pakistan financially. For Pakistan, there are other financiers, China, Saudi Arabia, UAE, right? US also, right? And even European countries, they have provided a lot of funds to Pakistan. So as an arch rival with so many disputes with Pakistan, it won't be right for India to provide financial support to Pakistan's economy, right? Of course, in a worst case scenario, we'll try to do something if there is a complete collapse. But as of now, India has never even thought about it. And correctly so. Why should we help out a rival country like Pakistan, which has done nothing but destabilize India? Its only purpose in the last 70 years has been to target India, destabilize India, right? So how can you justify any support from the government to Pakistan? It becomes unjustifiable. So there's no reason why India would support Pakistan financially. Abhijit is asking, deep state is working with all the power, but it has no responsibility. Correct? You're absolutely right. Deep state of Pakistan wields all the power, the authority, but it does not take any responsibility. Then how can India's diplomatic pressure work as civilian administration is rendered powerless? Now, this is the dilemma. This is the challenge we have been facing. Now, see, let's say there is a terror attack from Pakistan. Now, if we blame Pakistan for the attack, let's say we even bring evidence to show that the terror attack was linked to Pakistan. Of course, our blame will be on the Pakistani state, the government, the civilian government. As Abhijit has correctly pointed out, civilian government has limited powers. The real authority lies with the deep state, the army and ISI. They are the ones controlling the terror groups. They are the ones who would have likely ordered the terror attack. So whatever diplomatic pressure we put, it falls on the civilian government, not on the army and the ISI, right? This is the dilemma India has been facing. When we try to isolate Pakistan, put that international pressure, the pressure falls largely on the civilian government, not much on the army and the ISI. Is that clear? Let's say we bring the issue at UN. We get support from many friendly countries. They all criticize and target Pakistan diplomatically. This will not help much because the deep state is shielded. They don't take responsibility. They are behind the scenes. Civilian government in front, which is like a puppet, takes all the blame. They always keep giving excuses because they have no real authority. So we know this. This dual power center in Pakistan is the one creating the problems. And that is the strategy as well of the deep state. The reason why they have created a dual power center, is to take all power and authority while putting all blame and responsibility on the government. Or else, Pakistani army could have taken over the government and established military rule permanently, like Myanmar. But Pakistani army is smart. They know that if they establish military rule, if they take over authority publicly, they will take the blame and responsibility as well. That is the reason why they operate from behind the scenes. That is the reason why military coups have declined in Pakistan. Pakistani army is not directly interested in capturing authority. They secretly want to control the power while allowing civilian government to be present in the front. It's like a shield. It's like a terrorist using a human shield, a terrorist hiding behind a civilian. That's what Pakistani army has done. It has put civilian government in the front to take all the blame and responsibility, but it has no power and no authority. Power authority is there with army and ISI, but they don't take any responsibility because they are behind the scenes. This is where it becomes problematic for us diplomatically when we target Pakistan and try to put pressure on Pakistan. It doesn't have much of an impact. So what is the solution? Economic pressure. Economic pressure will hurt the army and ISI. If you can cut off funds to Pakistan, if you can convince other countries like US, Saudi Arabia, UAE, maybe even China, to stop providing finance to Pakistan, if you turn the tap off, the tap of money, if you turn it off, the impact will be immediately felt by the army and the ISI. That is the reason why we have focused so much on FATF. We have tried our best at FATF to get Pakistan blacklisted. India played a big role in the grey listing of Pakistan as well. So that brings a lot of economic pressure, and then the army and ISI will also come under pressure, right? Because they care about the money coming from the outside. So politically, yes, diplomatically, it is always a challenge for us because there are dual power centers in Pakistan. Sharath is asking how dual power center was developed. It was developed from the very beginning. From the beginning of Pakistan, from 1947, the army has remained powerful. It has interfered in politics. It has interfered in elections. It has thrown out governments, thrown out leaders, and captured power repeatedly. That is how the military has played a big role and cornered authority and power for itself. That's how the dual power centers developed. Aniket is asking, sir, if both India and Pakistan had agreed for Kartarpur corridor, then why Pakistan has started stamping the tourist visa and creating the issue? There is no tourist visa. Please understand this. In Kartarpur corridor, there is no visa system. Right? It is just a travel pass given, one-day travel pass which is issued. But Pakistan expects the tourist to come with a passport. You have to carry your passport. The agreement was that passport will not be stamped by Pakistani immigration. But of late, Pakistan has started stamping the passport deliberately. That is their authority. I mean, that is the power they have. Any sovereign country, when allowing people into their country, they can stamp the passport if they want. Even though it had agreed to India to not stamp the passport, it is doing it. It's a deliberate act. Since our tensions and rivalry has increased, that is one way of Pakistan retaliating against India. Since it has the authority to stamp the passport, it is stamping the passport, which is derailing the Kartarpur initiative. Right? So it has become a major concern for the Sikh pilgrims. All right. So guys, these were the topics. Now, let's proceed to talk about Afghanistan. I would like to have a quick discussion. We have covered the introduction. Let's talk about the other developments and understand the current state of relations. After this, I'll show you some key projects involving India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan that provides an opportunity for improving relations between these countries. So that will be the end of this module, and then we can proceed to India-China relations. So yesterday, while talking about the Afghan civil war, while discussing the Khalistan movement and how Pakistan played a role in sponsoring Khalistan movement, I had explained what happened in Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989. Just to summarize and refresh your memory, in 1979, Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan during the Cold War to protect its influence against American influence in Afghanistan. Is that clear? I'm just giving a summary. Don't expect me to repeat everything again. We have spent around 30 minutes on this topic yesterday itself. I've already given an introduction to Afghanistan. I'm just refreshing your memory, summarizing it. So in 1979, the Afghan government was toppled by Soviet forces that invaded the country because during the Cold War, US and Soviet Union were competing for influence in every country. As American influence was growing and Afghan government was inclining towards the US, Soviet Union retaliated because Afghanistan was a neighboring country of Soviet Union. Soviet Union had direct borders with Afghanistan, right? So Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan and toppled the government and occupied the country. So this gave an opportunity for US and its allies, that is Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and European countries. They aligned together to wage a covert proxy war against the occupying Soviet forces. So they sponsored the creation of Afghan Mujahideen by radicalizing the Pashtuns. Their intelligence agencies, the CIA in particular of the US, would work with Pakistan's ISI and Saudi intelligence and European intelligence agencies, and they would pump massive amounts of money and weapons into the hands of the ISI. Now, ISI, along with these Western agencies, they would further radicalize the Afghan Pashtuns, give them terror training, supply them weapons, all the logistics needed to raise this terrorist insurgent outfit called Afghan Mujahideen to fight the Soviet troops that were occupying the country. So this pushed Afghanistan into a state of civil war because the Afghan Mujahideen launched a major insurgency against the occupying Soviet troops. This war continued for a decade, from 1979 to 1989. The war escalated and ended with the defeat of Soviet forces. Initially, Soviet Union thought it won the war in 1979 when it occupied the country. But what Soviet Union didn't realize was the resilience of the Afghans, especially the Pashtuns. Pashtuns are a resilient community. From centuries, they have fought wars and battles. They are a war-hardened community, right? They're not new to wars and conflicts. From centuries, Pashtuns have been involved in wars and conflicts, and in general, Afghan people, even other Afghan ethnic groups, they have been involved in wars and conflicts since many, many centuries. They don't like any kind of outside intervention. If any outside power were to take over the country, they will fight back, they will resist, and they will throw the outside power out. That is why Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires. Basically, empires have come here trying to control Afghanistan and they have died. They have been defeated. Any idea which was the first empire to be defeated in Afghanistan? 3 major powers have been defeated in Afghanistan till date. That's why experts, strategic experts, they refer to Afghanistan as the graveyard of empires, where empires come to die. Which was the first major empire defeated here? Greeks, Mongols, the Ottomans, right? I'll accept all of that. If you're talking about ancient medieval times, yes. From Persians to Ottomans, Mongols, Greeks, none of them have been able to control Afghanistan for a prolonged period. Even if they occupy the region for a short period, they will fight back. The local Afghans, Pashtuns will fight back and throw them out. But in modern times, the first major empire to be defeated were the British. Right? Prior to this, yes, in ancient medieval times, various other empires, the local empires in the Persia, West Asia region, the Ottoman empires, the Greeks, then of course the Mongols as well. They've all been thrown out from this region. In modern times, the British were the first to be defeated. Right? The British kept their eyes on Afghanistan. They wanted to expand British Indian territory, right? British India included India and India and Pakistan. So from there, they wanted to expand the territory to occupy Afghanistan as well. That is what led to the Anglo-Afghan wars of 1800s. The British defeated the Afghans and they occupied the country. But after a few years, the Afghans were so resilient, the Pashtuns especially, they were so resilient, they fought back. They resisted the occupation. They waged an insurgent war and threw out the British. They defeated them and threw them out. Then came the Soviet Union. Soviets thought they occupied the country. But within a decade, Pashtuns, through Afghan Mujahideen, supported by all these countries, they fought back and defeated the Soviet forces through an insurgent war. The next major power to be defeated is the United States. The US invaded the country in 2001 after 9/11 attacks. It threw out the Taliban government. It deployed troops and almost captured the country. But within 20 years, the Americans were defeated, thrown out. They ran away from the country, leaving behind Afghanistan as it was. US failed to achieve its objectives. Right? In 2021, US quit Afghanistan. They claimed victory, but trust me, they didn't win anything. They didn't end terrorism. They didn't push Taliban back. Taliban instead became stronger, and they threw out the foreign troops, and Taliban is now back in power. So that is why Afghanistan is referred to as the graveyard of empires. Since historical times, empires have come here, occupied the region, and they have been defeated and thrown out because of the resistance of the locals, especially the Pashtuns. So the Afghan Mujahideen effectively fought back against Soviet troops, waged an insurgent war, and finally by 1989, Soviet troops were defeated and Soviet Union retreated from Afghanistan. Is that clear? Then what happened? The Americans, Europeans were very happy. They were elated. They won the Cold War. By 1991, USSR collapsed. Communism was defeated. Especially in Europe, communist countries fell apart. Right? All the communist countries, they turned towards democracy. Soviet Union was burdened by its corruption, its inefficient political, economic, and social system. And the defeat in Afghanistan also dealt a huge political and economic impact. Finally, by 91, Soviet Union itself disintegrated, marking the end of the Cold War. So as the Western countries won the Cold War, they were way too happy. Right? They were elated. They felt they won this Cold War. They became the superpower. The US in particular emerged as the sole superpower. So from a bipolar world, we moved towards a unipolar world. After Second World War, after 1945, when the Cold War began, we lived in a bipolar world. There were two major power centers, the US power bloc and the Soviet power bloc. But with collapse of Soviet Union in 1991, we entered a unipolar world. Because Soviet Union was succeeded by Russia, and Russia was never the same as Soviet Union. It was never as large or powerful or rich as the Soviet Union. Russia was a successor state, but it was never seen as the same as the Soviet Union. So US became the sole superpower for many decades, and we moved towards a unipolar world where you had one superpower, that was the United States. Now the Americans and the Europeans in general, who felt that they defeated Soviet Union, they won the Cold War, they conveniently ignored Afghanistan. They didn't pay enough attention to the Mujahideen that they had created. They were the ones who had misinterpreted religion. They financed the misinterpretation of religion. Right? Pakistan was the primary sponsorer. Right? It was carrying out the wishes of US, Saudi Arabia, and European countries. Using their funds and weapons, Pakistan had radicalized the region, allowed multiple terror groups to flourish, and it had played a direct role in creating and controlling the Mujahideen. Now, obviously, the Mujahideen fighters were free once Soviet Union was defeated and once it retreated. Western countries also lost attention. They didn't pay much attention because Afghanistan was no longer a priority for them. Now, this was a golden opportunity for Pakistan. Pakistan saw a great opportunity here. It realized that Afghanistan could become a key weapon against India. Pakistan realized by 1980s that it can use Afghan soil to target India, to destabilize India. It saw Afghanistan as a strategic depth. It saw that Afghanistan provided strategic depth against India to Pakistan. Now, what do you mean by this? In traditional terms, in a traditional war, strategic depth refers to space or territory where you can hide your forces and your troops and resources to keep it away from the reach of your enemy. Because in 1971 war, India defeated Pakistan conclusively. We broke the country into two parts. Our troops invaded into Pakistani territory, right? We created Bangladesh. We even occupied territories in West Pakistan. So since then, Pakistan had a fear that if there is another war with India, Indian troops will invade the country and take over the country. So in the traditional era, where conventional wars were fought, Pakistan initially saw that if it can control Afghanistan, the neighboring country, it can hide its troops and key weapons away in the border areas or inside Afghanistan to keep it away from India's reach. That is the traditional concept of strategic depth. It's like, let's say there are two siblings. Let's say you have a brother or a sister. Your parents have got some biscuits or candies, right? You steal some of them, you hide it away to keep it away from your other sibling, right? You're keeping it away in a cupboard. You're hiding it somewhere. So that is your strategic depth. By ensuring that you're keeping it away, you're not allowing your sibling to get hold of your cookies or candies. Something similar works in a traditional conflict, right? In that era where traditional conventional wars were fought, Pakistan believed that if India were to invade their country again, if it controls Afghanistan, which is away from India, it can move the troops and key weapons and equipment away, even nuclear weapons away, so that India cannot reach Pakistan's assets. That is the traditional concept of strategic depth. But later, this concept has evolved. Today, no country gets involved in such conventional wars, right? Today, we live in a world where you fight hybrid wars, unconventional wars. So today for Pakistan, strategic depth means using Afghan territory for supporting anti-India terror groups. Pakistan realized in the 80s that it can use the terror infrastructure that was created here along the Durand line to support Khalistan terror outfits, to support Kashmir-based terror outfits. Remember, we had studied this yesterday. This is what I explained. In the 1980s, Pakistan diverted the funds and weapons sent by Western countries to train Afghan Mujahideen and the infrastructure as well. The same terror camps, terror facilities were used, the same funds and weapons were used to support Khalistan outfits and Kashmir-centric terror outfits. Pakistan had created a direct connection between Khalistan movement in Punjab, Kashmir insurgency and terrorism, and the Afghan conflict. So as the Afghan war came to an end, and as Soviet forces were defeated and they retreated by 1989, now Pakistan realized that Afghanistan is a strategic depth for the country. Not to hide the troops and weapons from India, but to use Afghan territory for raising anti-India terror groups, for using the terror infrastructure in the border areas, for using the facilities to shelter Khalistan groups and Kashmir-centric groups and sponsor terrorism against India. Because remember what Pakistan had sworn. It had sworn to bleed India through 1,000 cuts. It had sworn revenge against India after 1971. And now it was getting the opportunity. Now that Americans also retreated, right? Soviets were thrown out. Americans and other foreign powers lost interest in Afghanistan. They didn't care about Mujahideen. Pakistan had full control over Mujahideen and the Pashtun community. Pakistan quickly realized it can work with the Mujahideen, work with Pashtuns, it can work with Afghan warlords and support the terror facilities that were present, use them to breed anti-India terror groups. So that is the concept of strategic depth for Pakistan. So this requires Pakistan to meddle in Afghanistan. As long as Afghanistan is destabilized, as long as Afghan's politics is under Pakistan's control, it can keep using the border areas and Afghan soil and Afghan territory to support terrorism against India. It can support terrorism against India by linking the anti-India terror groups with the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and other terror groups present along the Af-Pak border. So from here onwards, Pakistan escalated this covert war. So Khalistan organizations, then Kashmir-centric groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Hizbul Mujahideen, later Jaish-e-Mohammed, they were all brought closer to Afghan-based terror outfits like Taliban, Al-Qaeda, then Haqqani Network, and other organizations. Pakistan was the one which created the links between them. It allowed them to use the terror facilities present all along the Af-Pak border to wage terrorism against India, to wage the secret war against India. Is that clear? Please understand this link. It's very, very important. The Americans wouldn't question what Pakistan would do because still Pakistan was their best friend, right? They trusted Pakistan. They didn't like India even in 1990s. They wouldn't care about India's concerns or interests. They gave Pakistan a free hand because it had helped them defeat Soviet Union. Pakistan leveraged the opportunity to turn the situation and control Afghan politics and use Afghan territory against India. And of course, India was aware of what was happening. We knew the developments. We were tracking the developments very, very closely. So in Afghanistan, after the retreat of Soviet Union, from 1989 till 1995, during this period, a major power struggle began in the country. Because there was no stable government, right? Western countries retreated, Soviet forces were thrown out, and now Pakistan was allowed to play the king, to play the master, to control Afghan's politics. That is exactly what Pakistan wanted. So what Pakistan did, it started supporting various factions of the Mujahideen. It started supporting various Afghan warlords who controlled the opium fields of Afghanistan. The ISI was always close to them, especially after training the Mujahideen. It had gained complete control over them. So Pakistan would strategically support certain Afghan leaders and Mujahideen leaders to claim power in the country. A power struggle began between different factions, and this pushed Afghanistan into a civil war. Many governments were formed by various warlords and Mujahideen leaders. Imagine, Mujahideen leaders and warlords came to power. They became leaders, cabinet ministers, and presidents. But very quickly, these governments would be toppled as well. The rival factions would topple these governments. So basically, from 1989 to 1995, it was a civil war in the country. There was no political stability. There was a very serious power struggle going on between various radical elements. Different Mujahideen leaders and warlords were fighting for control over Afghanistan, and Pakistan was strategically backing and supporting some of the leaders and factions to gain control over Afghan politics. in the middle of this, when everyone was focused on Afghan's political problems, from the Afghan Mujahideen, a set of young radical students, they broke out from the Mujahideen and formed a new organization known as the Taliban. A Mujahideen terrorist known as Mullah Omar, also known as the one-eyed Sheikh. He had only one eye left because as part of the Mujahideen war against Soviet Union, Mullah Omar had lost one of his eyes during the insurgent war. He was popularly referred to as the one-eyed Sheikh. So under his leadership, some of the young radical elements of the Mujahideen, they broke apart and they formed a new student-based organization called the Taliban. So basically, Taliban is a byproduct of Mujahideen. And who supported the creation of Taliban? Who supported Mullah Omar? Take a guess. None other than our dear friend Pakistan. Pakistan was playing a double, triple game in the country, backing different leaders, different warlords, trying to control the political situation. Pakistan's interest was, as long as it controls the politics, it can use Afghan territory against India. This was Pakistan's motivation. So it supported the creation of an even more radical outfit called Taliban, which was formed by a few radical younger Mujahideen leaders such as Mullah Omar. And Taliban had only one objective in mind. Taliban's only objective was to capture power, form a so-called caliphate, and establish Afghanistan as an Islamic emirate, and establish and implement the rigid Sharia law. This was Taliban's only priority. Taliban didn't care much about geopolitics. It didn't care much about Pakistan's interests or India's interests or American interests, at least in the initial years. Its sole objective was to throw all these leaders and factions out and capture power in the country and form an Islamic emirate, establish it like a caliphate, and enforce the strict Sharia law in the name of religion. Again, problem is not with religion, it is with these elements, with these political and geopolitical actors who misuse religion, misinterpret religion for their selfish interests. Please understand who financed radicalism here. It was the Americans. It was the Saudis, right? It was Pakistan. It was their governments and intelligence agencies that bred radicalism. You can't put the blame on religion here. Religion was twisted, given wrong interpretations deliberately for political, geopolitical reasons. So Taliban had this sole intention, and eventually in 1996, it threw out all these factions and warlords, killed most of them, and it rose to power in 1996. The Taliban won the civil war. It killed most of the warlords and Mujahideen leaders, threw out the governments and parties that existed, and captured power in the country and formed an Islamic emirate. It basically formed the government. Imagine a right-wing extremist organization, a terrorist insurgent organization, forming a government in a country. So from 96 to 2001, it was the Taliban's rule in Afghanistan. Is that clear? So let's stop the discussion for now. We'll take a short break, a 15 minutes break. We'll come back and resume the discussion. Let's come back by 7 p.m. After we come back, I will explain what happened under Taliban rule. What happened to India's interests? What did India do during this period? There are some very, very interesting developments that you should understand and study. We'll see what happened after 2001, right? We'll understand the recent developments of the last 20 years, and we'll discuss the current developments as well. So it's a very important topic. Don't go anywhere. So come back by 7 p.m. and let's resume the discussion. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the session. Now, let's continue the discussion on Afghanistan. We spoke about the rise of Taliban to power. It captured power in the country in 1996 and established a radical conservative government until 2001. During this period, the Taliban would largely be controlled by Pakistan's ISI. Pakistan's army and ISI would have a great deal of influence on the Taliban government. So immediately, Taliban started sheltering various terrorist outfits. It gave an open call for terrorists and radicals from around the world to assemble in Afghanistan, and Taliban said, "We will protect you. We will give you shelter to operate from our country." So as a result, several radical elements from around the world, including Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, all these top terrorists who were until then operating in Africa, in Sudan, in Egypt, etc., they all moved towards Afghanistan. So in 1990s, we saw the accumulation of radical extremists in Afghanistan who were sheltered and protected under the Taliban rule. So Taliban supported and sheltered the Al-Qaeda. It gave support to Osama bin Laden and several other radicals who came from around the world to form Al-Qaeda, a global terrorist organization with the aim of targeting Western countries. Osama bin Laden blamed Western countries for all the problems in many of the Muslim countries. Right? The geopolitical policies of US and other countries were in a way responsible for many of the problems in African countries and Gulf and West Asian countries. So by using this as an excuse, Al-Qaeda would give a call to target all the non-believers, the kafirs, particularly the Western countries. So very quickly, Al-Qaeda became a notorious terrorist organization based out of Afghanistan under the protection of the Taliban government. Now, Pakistan would link Taliban and Al-Qaeda closely with anti-India terror organizations. The terror groups that Pakistan had created, like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Hizbul Mujahideen, later Jaish-e-Mohammed, all these anti-India terror groups were closely connected with Al-Qaeda and Taliban. So essentially, this region, the Af-Pak border, became a hub of terrorism by 1990s. The Taliban would enforce a rigid interpretation of the Sharia law. It would give a very wrong and rigid interpretation to the Sharia law and enforce these strict conservative laws that would target religious minorities. It would target women's rights. And it led to large-scale human rights violations in Afghanistan. So anyone who doesn't subscribe to the rigid version of their ideology, that is Wahhabism and Salafist ideology, they would be targeted in the country. In Afghanistan, you had Sikh minorities, Buddhists, and small pockets of Hindu and Christian population as well. All these minorities were targeted, and even Muslims were targeted. Shias, Hazaras, and even Sunni Muslims who wouldn't abide by the strict, rigid interpretation of Taliban's version, right? They would all be targeted under Taliban's rule. It would impose extremist policies, and it would specifically target women. It prohibited the education of the girl child. Schools were targeted, right? Any form of Western education, Western culture was targeted. Movies, music, everything would be banned. And they would be treated as haram under this rigid interpretation of Sharia by the Taliban. Women would be prohibited from employment, right? They had to be accompanied by a male member if they have to step out. Forget rights like voting rights or rights to participate in the economy, right to travel. Forget those rights. Even basic rights wouldn't be made available to women, causing large-scale human rights violations in the country. So obviously, this rule was not tolerable for India. India knew that Taliban was a puppet of Pakistan and anti-India terror groups were being sheltered. So obviously, India rejected Taliban's rule and we never recognized the Taliban government. India treated Taliban as a terrorist organization and we broke off all diplomatic ties. And Taliban would also cut off ties with India and it threw out Indian diplomats from the country. So as soon as Taliban came to power in 1996, India-Afghan relations came to an end. The official diplomatic ties were cut off because India wouldn't recognize the Taliban government. In fact, most countries didn't recognize the Taliban government. And Taliban, which was acting at the behest of Pakistan, threw out Indian diplomats and shut down the Indian embassy at Kabul. But within Afghanistan, there is a major ethnic division that you should understand. If the Mujahideen and Taliban were largely made up of Pashtuns, it was Pashtuns who were recruited into Afghan Mujahideen, and even Taliban was largely comprised of the Pashtuns. In fact, the stronghold of the Mujahideen and the Taliban has always been southern parts of Afghanistan, cities like Kandahar, right? And other places like Jalalabad and even later Kabul. These would become the strongholds of the Mujahideen and the Taliban, right? Because this is where the Pashtuns are present in large numbers. That is where they dominate these parts of Afghanistan. But Pashtuns face a historical opposition from other ethnic tribes that are collectively known as the northern tribes of Afghanistan. In the northern parts of Afghanistan, towards the Hindu Kush mountain ranges that connects with Central Asia region, there are many northern tribes in Afghanistan with a Central Asian heritage, with a Central Asian link. You have tribal groups like Tajiks, Uzbeks, and other ethnic communities like Hazaras, Ahmadiyas, the Turks, and the others. All these northern tribes historically have fought against the Pashtuns. Since centuries, there is a rivalry, enmity between Pashtuns and the northern tribes in Afghanistan. So when Taliban came to power, obviously the northern tribes opposed the Taliban rule. As Taliban was mainly comprised of the Pashtuns and Taliban was enforcing such rigid laws, the Taliban rule was resisted by the northern tribes. The Tajiks, Uzbeks, and other northern tribes, they would form a coalition and work together to counter and oppose the Taliban rule. This is where India would get involved in a secret war to defeat Taliban and to throw out Taliban. Not just India, even other like-minded countries such as Russia and Iran. These three regional powers, they had a common interest to oppose the Taliban rule and to throw out Taliban from power. So to achieve this objective, these countries launched their own covert war. India, Russia, and Iran would sponsor the northern tribes and they would form a coalition force called the Northern Alliance. The Northern Alliance became a formidable resistance against the Taliban rule. Is that clear? Russia had a common interest because Russia's predecessor, Soviet Union, had been defeated by Afghan Mujahideen. And Taliban was a byproduct of the Mujahideen. So obviously Russia was concerned about the spread of radicalism and terrorism towards Central Asia and Russia's area of influence. Iran was deeply concerned because Iran is a neighboring country of Afghanistan. And Iran is a Shia country, a Shia power, whereas Taliban is a radical Sunni outfit. So because of the sectarian divide, right, Iran also opposed Taliban at that point and aligned with Russia and India. And together, their intelligence agencies launched a covert war in Afghanistan. Russia would help India's RAW, India's Research and Analysis Wing, was directly involved in this conflict, right? Basically, it was a conflict between Indian interests and Pakistani interests. Taliban and Northern Alliance were the proxies. Since Taliban was a threat for Indian interests, Pakistan was controlling it. India had a direct interest to sponsor Northern Alliance to counter the Taliban. So India's RAW would get bases in Central Asia with the help of Russia. In Central Asia, there were Soviet military bases like Farkhor Air Base and the Aini Air Base. After Soviet Union disintegrated, they came under Central Asian countries like Tajikistan. But Russia still had a lot of influence over these Central Asian countries. So Russia would allow India to access these military facilities in Central Asia that borders Afghanistan. And from here, India's RAW would run covert operations with Russian intelligence and Iranian intelligence. From the Iranian border and from Central Asia, from both the sides, a covert war was run to support the Northern Alliance by providing them with funds and weapons. Understood? So to protect our interests, India had to engage in this conflict to counter Pakistani designs. The Northern Alliance was led by a legendary leader known as Ahmad Shah Massoud. He was the leader of the Northern Alliance, along with other leaders like General Dostum. Some of you might have heard about these names. Ahmad Shah Massoud, General Dostum, and many others. They were the leaders of Northern Alliance. Ahmad Shah Massoud operated from the Panjshir Valley. Panjshir Valley is a strategic region in northern Afghanistan near the Hindu Kush Mountains, and it's a naturally protected area. On all the sides there are mountains and there is only one opening to enter Panjshir Valley. So there are natural defenses. It's not easy for outsiders to attack Panjshir Valley. So Northern Alliance set up its base at Panjshir Valley under the leadership of Ahmad Shah Massoud, and Russia, India, and Iran would support him by providing funds, weapons, and all the needed support to fight the Taliban in Afghanistan. That's why Ahmad Shah Massoud, he became popular as the Lion of the Panjshir Valley. India's RAW had very close contacts with Ahmad Shah Massoud. He was essentially an Indian asset, fighting for Indian interests against Pakistan's activities in the region. So these covert wars would continue until 2001, but by then, Al-Qaeda had become a major threat. Al-Qaeda had become a major threat. It had started carrying out major attacks against the United States. See, many of you would know about the 9/11 attacks, which happened in 2001. But even before that, Al-Qaeda was involved in major attacks against US and US interests around the world. So Americans knew about the threat from Al-Qaeda and the threat coming from Afghanistan-Pakistan region. In fact, the World Trade Center in New York, which was eventually targeted during the 9/11 attacks, was targeted much before that. In the early 90s itself, Al-Qaeda had carried out a bombing attack against the World Trade Center. It wasn't a very successful attack. It largely failed. Al-Qaeda terrorists had infiltrated into US and they packed a truck with explosives and they parked it in the basement. There was a massive explosion. Many people were killed, but it didn't affect the building or the structure. So it was a partially successful attack, but this was the first major attack by Al-Qaeda on American soil. This was in early 90s, much before the 9/11 attacks of 2001. In late 90s, across Africa and West Asia, Al-Qaeda carried out multiple attacks against American interests. For example, in Kenya and in Tanzania, that's in East Africa, these radical groups had got local support. Al-Qaeda's ideology had spread. It had spread to Northern Africa, East Africa, Southeast Asia. So around the world, Al-Qaeda was building a support base, right? It had a lot of support in Indonesia, for example, in East African countries, in North African countries. So by using this local support, Al Qaeda carried out one of the biggest attacks in Kenya and Tanzania in late 90s against the American embassies. The US embassies at Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, they were targeted with a suicide bombing, killing hundreds and hundreds of people. It was a massive attack. Then in Yemen, off the coast of Yemen in Arabian Sea, a US naval ship, USS Cole, was targeted by Al Qaeda. Imagine a sea-based attack against a naval ship of the US. Many American sailors were killed, naval officers were killed in this attack. So much before 2001, Al Qaeda had already become a serious threat for US and Western interests. Finally, in 2001, it pulled off the mother of all terror attacks, that is the 9/11 attacks. These attacks were designed to be spectacular, to attract global attention, right? Al Qaeda put in the effort needed to hijack multiple passenger aircrafts, to infiltrate multiple terrorists into US, to train them in flying passenger commercial jets, and using the hijacked aircraft as missiles to target strategic buildings in the US. Right? So the World Trade Center was brought down, both the North and South Towers. The Pentagon was hit. Pentagon is the headquarters of US DoD, the Department of Defense. Then another aircraft, which was hijacked, was possibly headed either towards White House or the US Congress, US Capitol building in Washington. But fortunately, the hostages who knew what was happening, they overpowered the hijackers and brought down the aircraft in an open, empty field. So in total, 4 hijacked aircrafts were used by Al-Qaeda terrorists, right? They had lived in US for several months. They had trained, they had learned how to fly planes in American flying schools. They escaped the surveillance of American intelligence agencies and pulled off the biggest terror attack of all times. This was a major turning point. Now, the reason why I'm giving you all these details, right, even though it's not directly relevant for the exam, is that because you should have that context. You should know the importance of 9/11 attacks. This is a major turning point in global geopolitics. It changed America's approach towards terrorism. It changed America's outlook of Pakistan and India. US sought closer ties with India following the 9/11 attacks, as US couldn't trust Pakistan anymore, because there was a clear Pakistani link in the 9/11 attacks. Right? There were multiple terrorists with Pakistani links, connections to the ISI. These terrorists of Al-Qaeda, they had come from the same ecosystem that Pakistan had created and nurtured against India. Finally, there was some realization in the US and Western countries that Pakistan cannot be relied upon. They needed a more reliable partner, a more trusted partner, and this is where India came into picture. Right? India-US relations started seeing an improvement, and in general, our ties with Western countries started improving for the first time after 1971. So India-US cooperation started improving, beginning with the field of counterterrorism and intelligence sharing. This is where India-US started cooperating first. This led to further expansion of ties, and it led to the building of strategic partnership between the two countries. So gradually, defense, military relations improved with focus on counterterrorism. Ties between intelligence agencies started improving. That is what led to the transformation of India-US relations. Is that clear? In fact, right before 9/11 attacks, just one day before, on the 10th of September 2001, Ahmad Shah Massoud was assassinated by Al-Qaeda. That shows the extent of planning. That shows the anticipation by Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and Pakistan about what would happen after the 9/11 attacks. They knew that US is going to retaliate. And if US were to retaliate, if it were to attack Afghanistan to target Al-Qaeda and Taliban, right, it would need support of leaders like Ahmad Shah Massoud and General Dostum. So before 9/11 attacks, just one day before, On the 10th of September, Ahmad Shah Massoud was assassinated by Al-Qaeda terrorists. Thus, India lost a key asset. India, Russia, Iran had cultivated him, right? He had helped our efforts. He was fighting the Taliban. So with Ahmad Shah Massoud eliminated, the US had to rely on General Dostum and Northern Alliance as part of its planned invasion of Afghanistan. Immediately, US declared a global war on terrorism. It declared a global war on terror. It got support of the United Nations and all the NATO allies. And with UN's approval, UN approved the invasion of Afghanistan, and NATO countries formed a coalition force called ISAF, the International Security Assistance Force, to invade the country. See, initially, the American target was Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. So US demanded that Taliban government should cooperate. They asked Taliban to help apprehend Osama bin Laden and demolish Al-Qaeda. But Taliban refused. Taliban refused to give up its brother organizations like Al-Qaeda. It protected Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, and as a result, US declared war on Afghanistan itself. It decided to throw Taliban out, which had sheltered Al-Qaeda. The US demanded Pakistan to cooperate. Right? Without Pakistan's help, these operations would not be possible. So Pakistan came under tremendous pressure to help US and Western countries in this invasion. So with UN's approval, NATO countries formed a military alliance called ISAF, International Security Assistance Force, and they planned to invade the country. And right before the American invasion, Pakistan airlifted all the top terror leaders by carrying out the Kunduz airlift. From a place known as Kunduz in Afghanistan, all the top Taliban leaders, Al-Qaeda leaders, they were safely taken away by the ISI in Pakistani military aircraft. It's called the Kunduz airlift, where hundreds of terrorists were taken out of Afghanistan before foreign troops could invade and target them. That is the extent to which Pakistan was involved in terrorism. To the world, it was saying that we are also fighting terrorism. We are ready to help US. But secretly, it was taking away the terrorists because they are Pakistan's assets. To protect these terrorists, to protect the terror infrastructure that it had created against India, it took out most of the top leaders and sheltered them safely inside Pakistan. And guess who monitored this operation? India's RAW would generate real-time intelligence on Kunduz airlift, and we shared this with US. This led US to trust India more. It led India-US to get closer in intelligence sharing and counter-terrorism, because India became a reliable, trusted partner. Both the countries needed each other following the crisis that had erupted. Even for us, counter-terrorism was a top priority, right? And we knew we needed American help and Western help. So following 9/11 attacks and the invasion of Afghanistan, close security strategic relations developed between India and US and India and European countries. Understood? So Pakistan sheltered these terrorists at Quetta. The Taliban leadership was sheltered at Quetta. It was an open secret. Even Mullah Omar, the founder of Taliban, and the entire top Shura, the High Council of Taliban, right, that comprises the top leaders of Taliban, they were all safely brought to Quetta in Balochistan and sheltered by Pakistan. Even top Al-Qaeda terrorists, including Osama bin Laden, he was later found at Abbottabad when he was finally assassinated in 2011 by American special forces. Right? For US, it was a top priority to hunt Osama bin Laden. They searched for him for a decade. They couldn't find his presence anywhere. Obviously, he was hiding in Pakistan, sheltered by the ISI. Finally, the CIA figured out where he was sheltered. Abbottabad is a military town. Imagine, top military officials reside there. It's right on the outskirts of Islamabad, very close to Rawalpindi. In such a high-profile zone where the top Pakistani military officials are present, That is where a safe house had been built for Osama bin Laden. Just like India had said, Pakistan was nothing short of a sponsorer and supporter of terrorism, right? So, US Special Forces, the Navy SEALs, they infiltrated into Pakistan in 2011 and they eliminated Osama bin Laden. Is that clear? So, this has been a long, protracted war. It has had many devastating consequences. There were some positive developments as well. Now, let me explain what happened from 2001 to 2021. Now, this part of Afghan history is very, very crucial for India. For our exams, this part of the history is more important. What happened after 2001? What happened recently in 2021? Right? These events are very, very crucial. So, following the invasion led by US, Taliban was toppled. Obviously, Taliban had no way to fight back. It couldn't withstand such a massive foreign invasion. So the NATO coalition led by US, they threw out Taliban from power, and immediately the US established a civilian government. The Afghan civilian government was established. Democracy was introduced. Elections were also held. This was the American way of rebuilding the country and countering terrorism. So they installed democracy, brought elections, and provided for a elected civilian government, and Hamid Karzai became the president of Afghanistan. And who is Hamid Karzai? Hamid Karzai is a very, very close friend of India. He has spent a large part of his growing up years in India. He was trained in an Indian military academy as a young Afghan officer. He shares very, very close connections with India, even from 70s and 80s. So a close friend of India became the leader, right? He became the president of the country, and India immediately jumped on the opportunity. India capitalized on the opportunity. We reopened our embassy at Kabul. We quickly established multiple consulates all across the country. I've given a map. You can see that over here. India established 4 consulates. Apart from the embassy at Kabul, we opened consulates at Kandahar, Herat, Mazar-e-Sharif, and Jalalabad. Is that clear? So 5 major diplomatic missions were opened because India had major plans for Afghanistan. We opened 4 consulates, reopened the embassy, and established a strong diplomatic relationship with the civilian government. Because this was India's hope to keep Taliban out. There was no country more happier than India when Taliban was thrown out. Because all along, Taliban had been a Pakistani asset. It was because of Taliban that Pakistan had nurtured so many anti-India terror groups, and Afghan soil had become a threat for India. When Taliban was in power, terrorism increased in Kashmir. Threats in Punjab had increased. Right? The Mujahideen previously was a threat. The Taliban was a threat. So for India, the safe option was to rely on the civilian government backed by Western countries. So as US and Western forces continued their hunt for Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and Osama bin Laden, India used the opportunity to invest in Afghanistan and help in the reconstruction of the country. India invested heavily over the next 20 years. We brought $3 billion worth of investment. India became one of the biggest investors. We brought around $3 billion worth of investments into the country and executed many key projects that generated a lot of goodwill and soft power influence for India. See, traditionally, amongst Afghans, India has a lot of cultural and soft power influence. Believe it or not, Bollywood movies and music is very much liked in Afghanistan and in many countries across Asia and Africa. So we leverage that in our diplomacy as well. Under Taliban, all of this had been shut. Now we had an opportunity to reopen these ties, and India immediately took up key projects to win the hearts and minds of Afghan people. That is the best way to counter Pakistani influence and the influence of Taliban. So India built the Kabul parliament. The Afghan parliament building in Kabul was built by India to strengthen Afghan democracy. This was our contribution to help Afghan democracy. We also helped in the conduct of Afghan elections. Is that clear? India took up key projects like Salma hydropower dam to provide electricity to the people of Afghanistan. We built a hydropower dam to generate electricity and also supply drinking water by building the Salma dam in Afghanistan. India also built several schools, hospitals. We built a key highway connecting Zaranj and Dilaram. The Zaranj-Dilaram highway was built by India, and it's a strategic link, a vital link, because Zaranj is present near the Iranian border. Zaranj is a border town of Afghanistan near the Iranian border, which is very close to an Iranian town known as Zahedan. Understood? So India's plan was to connect Zaranj and Zahedan with a railway line that would extend all the way till Chabahar port in Iran, which was also an Indian project. Remember, we discussed this in previous classes. I told you that we were seeking access to Afghanistan and Central Asia via Iran. So India built the strategic Chabahar port so that through Arabian Sea we can connect directly with Chabahar port in Iran, and through the Chabahar railway line we could connect with Zahedan, the Iranian border town along Afghan border, and connect this with Zaranj, where we had already built a key highway that connects with Dilaram. From here, we could have easily extended the road to Kabul and to Central Asian countries. This was India's dream, to create a transport corridor from India to Iran to Afghanistan to Central Asia. And as part of this ambitious connectivity project, we built the Chabahar port, we built Zaranj-Dilaram highway, and we were trying to build the Chabahar railway line by working with Iran. These were the major Indian investments. Is that clear? Later, India and Afghanistan established a strategic partnership and we started providing limited military supplies as well, because we were looking to strengthen the Afghan security forces. Because you can't rely on Americans and foreign troops to be present permanently to fight terrorism and Taliban and Al-Qaeda. Right? The key was to strengthen the Afghan government, strengthen democracy, and give the training, capabilities, and resources to Afghan security forces. Afghanistan wanted heavy weaponry from India. It wanted battle tanks, fighter jets, missiles. But India was hesitant to provide heavy weaponry because we were concerned how Pakistan would react. If India were to supply heavy weaponry like fighter jets and battle tanks and heavy ammunition, including missiles, Pakistan would retaliate, right? Pakistan would definitely escalate tensions with India. So keeping this in mind, we decided not to supply heavy weaponry, but we gave limited military supplies. We gave old Russian and Soviet helicopters. We gave small arms and ammunition. And more importantly, we provided them training in Indian military academies. In Indian institutions, Afghan military officers were trained. They were given specialized training in counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. We established very close intelligence sharing. Intelligence cooperation became very close between RAW and NSD, which was the Afghan intelligence agency. We would share intelligence, work together on covert operations to target terror groups. There were very close relations between NSD of Afghanistan and India's RAW. Between our armed forces, close relations were set up where Indian forces would provide training to their military officers. We supplied some basic weapons as well, including old Soviet helicopters and basic arms and ammunition. Right? This was the kind of strategic partnership we had built. In 2017, we even signed a trilateral agreement. India, Afghanistan, and Iran. These three countries, they signed a trilateral agreement to operationalize the Chabahar trade corridor. That is to supply goods from Afghanistan to India and India to Afghanistan via Chabahar port by using the road and railway infrastructure in Iran and the highway that we had built in Afghanistan. This route became operational and we started increasing our trade between the two sides. India even won mining license. Since we had a friendly government, we got a mining license to mine iron ore from the Hajigak iron ore mines in central Afghanistan. India's plan was to extract iron ore from Hajigak and transport this to Iran and bring this to Chabahar port and from there bring that to India. We had similar plans for bringing Central Asian resources. We were planning a similar route where Central Asian resources could be transported from Afghanistan to Iran to India. These were the ambitious plans that India had. But unfortunately, things started turning around. Things turned around very, very quickly. And this was largely because of the blunders and mistakes committed by the Americans. Now, let me tell you what the US was doing in the meanwhile. The US, after invading the country, it toppled Taliban, installed a civilian government, right? And it was targeting Al-Qaeda and other terror groups. This was great news. But as usual, America started prioritizing its self-interests, rather selfish interests. It got distracted from this critical war and started getting involved in unnecessary wars, such as the illegal invasion of Iraq. In 2003, US and UK, they generated false intelligence claiming that Iraq was developing WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, under Saddam Hussein. These were lies peddled by American and British leaders and their intelligence agencies. They created false intelligence to convince the world that Saddam Hussein was developing WMDs. Their goal was to remove Saddam Hussein, to topple Saddam Hussein's dictatorship and gain control over Iraq, primarily to control the oil markets. Driven by geopolitical and economic reasons, right? They created false intelligence, used this as an excuse to invade the country, and this was nothing short of an illegal invasion. They destroyed a stable country. Iraq was a stable country, even though it was a dictatorship, and a great friend of India. Saddam Hussein was a good friend of India. Iraq has consistently been a top oil supplier to India. So US got distracted and got involved in an unnecessary war that distracted American efforts in Afghanistan. Obviously, no country can fight simultaneous wars, the two in such faraway countries. It was draining trillions of dollars, losing thousands of soldiers, right? So obviously, these foreign wars became unpopular. The foreign wars became unpopular for the American public. By 2009, the false war in Iraq was exposed, right? So US citizens, they started questioning, what are we doing in Iraq? What are we doing in Afghanistan? the US had lost around 3,000 soldiers in these conflicts, right? The death count was more than the death count in 9/11 attacks. In 9/11 attacks as well, around 3,000 people were killed. More than that, American soldiers were killed in Afghanistan and Iraq. So day by day, more and more American soldiers were coming back in in body bags, creating a popular resistance in US, and the American public, they grew tired and frustrated of these foreign conflicts. They wanted these wars to end. If US had focused just on Afghanistan, if it hadn't gotten distracted in Iraq and in other places, right, it would have achieved something concrete. It would have helped in weakening terrorism in the Afghanistan-Pakistan region. But instead, it focused on its self-interests, got distracted, diverted from Afghanistan, and this gave Taliban an opportunity to regroup and revive from 2007 onwards. From 2007 onwards, by taking support in Pakistan, by using Pakistan as a base, Afghan Taliban started rejuvenating, especially in stronghold areas like Kandahar, in southern parts of Afghanistan, where Pashtuns are very strong. The Taliban started regrouping. It started reviving itself, and it carried out a major resurgence. It escalated the conflict by launching an insurgent war against the foreign troops. The foreign troops became the target for a renewed Taliban. So now Taliban started targeting the foreign troops, and this put pressure on other allies. And very quickly, NATO allies exited the war. Within years, one by one, NATO allies, American allies, started dropping out. From Australia to Germany, France, UK, right? And all the other military partners of US who had contributed troops, they were taking losses, incurring massive expenditure, getting their soldiers killed. So eventually, day by day, these countries started pulling out their troops. So as foreign troops retreated, it was largely American troops who were left. And now Taliban did not face a strong opposition. The Afghan government, on the other hand, the Afghan government and Afghan security forces, they were still weak. Corruption had taken over. Afghan politicians had bred corruption in the system, right? Afghan officials had bred corruption. The government and security forces were still weak. They had no strength to fight Taliban and terrorism. They relied on foreign support. But as NATO allies quit and all these countries pulled out their troops, it was left for the American troops to fight a resurgent Taliban. And as you can expect, the American troops, they failed spectacularly. So President Obama, he came under tremendous pressure to pull out the American troops. It became a political issue. Very quickly, by 2010, this had become an electoral and political issue in the United States. Right? Even after one decade, US had no results to show apart from toppling Taliban. Right? Terrorism still flourished. Attacks were still happening in Western countries. So there were questions being asked. Why American soldiers are getting killed? Why are we spending trillions of dollars? It became a key electoral issue, and it pushed President Obama to focus on pulling out American troops as soon as possible. So quitting Afghanistan became American priority. Their priority was no longer to defeat terrorism. Their priority was not to neutralize Al-Qaeda. Their priority shifted. It became a priority for them to pull out the American troops by claiming victory, by showcasing some success. So when Osama bin Laden was killed, this became an opportunity. It was like a photo opportunity, showing that we have killed the leader, we have achieved our objectives in the war, we won the war. So now American focus shifted to withdraw the troops as soon as possible, even though terrorism flourished in Afghanistan. Taliban was reviving, it was becoming stronger than ever. Right? India kept warning the US. India kept warning Western countries that don't lose your focus, don't take the pressure off. But Western countries had their own motivations and they allowed Taliban to revive and resurge, leading to a massive revival of the Taliban. So President Obama, he decided to deploy more troops. He ordered a surge for a few years with the hope of curbing Taliban and terrorism. And then he promised that troops will be pulled out by the next election. Before pulling out the troops, President Obama thought that let us put more troops for now. He caused a surge in troops. He thought more troops will help in weakening Taliban and fighting terrorism. And then by the election time, we can pull out all American troops. So that could become a success for the US. But this strategy also failed. The surge in American troops did not help. Deploying few troops additionally didn't help curb Taliban because now Taliban was stronger than before and it had mass support in southern and eastern parts of Afghanistan. So President Obama failed to execute the pullout. His successor, Donald Trump, he made it an electoral priority. When he contested the 2016 presidential elections, he promised the American voters that if he is voted as the president, he will ensure American troops are brought back at any cost. Right? Donald Trump never cared about security interests here. He never cared about defeating terrorism. His focus was bringing back American soldiers, pleasing the American public, right? Because that was their priority at that point, political priority. So as promised, Donald Trump started direct negotiations. He opened direct talks with Taliban despite opposition from countries like India, and he was looking for an exit deal. Now imagine this. US invaded the country to throw Taliban out, and now they were negotiating with the same outfit. What does that indicate? It clearly indicates that US was negotiating from a weak position, right? For them, priority was to pull out, irrespective of what happens. It meant Taliban had taken the lead. It held the bargaining power. So any such negotiation between a government and an insurgent group, that too where insurgents are holding the lead and the edge, it's definitely bound to give you bad results. And the worst part was in these Afghan negotiations, in this peace deal that the Americans were searching for, they sidelined the Afghan government itself. Afghan people were sidelined. This was a government installed by the US, a so-called democratic government. The Americans never consulted the Afghan government. They kept Afghan government, the president, completely out of these talks. Right after Hamid Karzai, Ashraf Ghani had become the president. They never kept the president of the Afghan government in loop, and Ashraf Ghani was also accused of breeding massive corruption, which had weakened the government and the Afghan security forces. Afghan people and various stakeholders, they were never consulted in the peace process. So what Donald Trump did was that he appointed a special envoy. A US envoy is appointed to talk to Taliban leaders, and Qatar offered to mediate. Since Qatar does have links with various radical and extremist outfits, it is also close to the US. It offered to mediate between the two, and it offered Doha as a place for negotiations. Taliban was offered a political office. It was allowed to set up a political office at Doha. Like countries open embassies in other countries, Taliban, which is an insurgent radical outfit, was allowed by US and Qatar to set up a political office at Doha. These Taliban leaders would directly talk to US envoy, negotiate with the US government, and finally they worked out a peace deal. The Afghan peace deal, also called US Taliban peace deal, also referred to as the Doha Agreement. This was signed in 2020. And this essentially marked the end of Afghan's democracy. Because Taliban was more powerful than ever. By 2020, Taliban controlled a good 65% of Afghan territory. 60 to 65% of Afghan territory was already under Taliban's control. Afghan's government was just for the sake of it. In such a position, US negotiated with Taliban because for them, priority was an exit, a face-saving exit. So they can claim victory in front of the world and the American public and pull out the troops. And later, they wouldn't bother with what happens in Afghanistan. Right? In any such negotiation where they're negotiating from a position of weakness, obviously Taliban had the edge. It had all the bargaining power to itself. It could demand whatever it wanted. Right? For the Americans, it was a priority to safely pull out the troops, ensure that all Americans are pulled out safely. And they had to concede to what Taliban was demanding. And the worst part was they kept Afghan government and people out. Right? They were never consulted. And even India was kept out by the US. Even though we had assisted them by giving intelligence, working together in counterterrorism, investing $3 billion in the country to reconstruct the country that they had destroyed. Right? Despite all of this, India was completely sidelined by the US. Not once India was invited to the Doha negotiations. Not even once. We were invited at the last minute for the signing of the agreement. India was invited by US to witness the signing of the Doha deal, the Doha agreement, where US basically gave Taliban back, gifted Taliban with Afghanistan. Is that clear? So what happened was in the Doha agreement, the terms of the deal was that US will exit. It will pull out all the troops. It will shut down its military bases, pull out all the American troops within a given deadline. A deadline was set for around 2021, and US had promised to exit completely. Taliban promised they wouldn't target American troops. They won't target the American troops. All right? They won't allow Afghan soil to be used by terror groups against Western countries. Now, please pay attention to this point. US says that it is with India to fight terrorism. Now, look what they agreed to in the deal. They agreed that Taliban will not target the American troops who are exiting, and Taliban will not allow Afghan territory to be used by terrorist organizations which target Western countries. What about terror groups that operate here which target India? That was never considered. There are terror groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Haqqani Network, Jaish-e-Mohammed, right? Even Al-Qaeda, they all operate here and they target India. This has never been mentioned in the deal. Taliban's promise to US is that if you guys quit, we will not target your troops. We will not allow any terror group to operate here which will target US and European countries. So US and Europe will be safe from terrorism, but no such promise has been made for other countries. It essentially means US was looking after its own interests without bothering about others like India. Obviously, India was upset. India did protest, but nothing much that India could do about it. Apart from this, they also agreed to release all the prisoners that they had held, including several top terrorists. US forces, Afghan forces, they held hundreds and hundreds of Taliban terrorists in their custody. They were all released without conditions. Thousands of Taliban terrorists, Al-Qaeda terrorists were released without any conditions by US, and they forced Afghan government also to release them. Even Afghan security forces had arrested many of them. All of them were released without conditions. The only promise US got from this was a safe exit where Americans will not be killed. They can quit, leave the country as soon as possible. In return, they promised that Afghanistan will not be used by terrorist organizations to target US or European countries. So look at the one-sided nature of the deal that the Americans agreed to. And this is nothing short of America's failure and defeat in Afghanistan. This was an open pass given to Taliban. It was an open pass to take over Afghanistan. It was a known fact. When the deal was signed, they already controlled 65% of the territory. Afghan government and forces were already weak. It was a known fact that Taliban will throw out Ashraf Ghani, that Taliban will capture all the major cities, throw out Afghan forces, and return Taliban's rule in Afghanistan. That is exactly what happened. Right? After Trump agreed to this was under Donald Trump, right? This deal had to be carried forward by the next president, Joe Biden. Right? The promise had been made, the commitments were done. So after Biden took over, the American troops were pulled out by May 2021, much before the deadline, right? Without any notice, without any prior announcements, secretly US started pulling out the troops by May and June 2021. All right? So most of the American troops had left, and this was a free pass for Taliban. Now there was no one to challenge Taliban. Afghan forces never had the capability to hold against Taliban invasion. Within weeks, experts were predicting that it may take months or 1 year for Taliban to take over. But within weeks, Afghanistan fell. By September 2021, in just 2 months, Taliban ran through the country. They captured all key border points with Pakistan, Iran, and Central Asia. They closed all the borders. They took over all major cities. Not just Kandahar and Kabul, but even Herat, Mazar-e-Sharif, Jalalabad, all cities were captured. Afghan forces, they didn't even fight. They surrendered because they knew they'll be targeted. The top government officials ran away, including the president Ashraf Ghani. They fled the country, and within 6 to 8 weeks, Afghanistan had collapsed. The government was gone. Taliban was in power, and it established an interim government. Now, this was the nightmare India was worried about. $3 billion worth of investments down the drain. Right? Our security interests completely compromised. So India, of course, was deeply worried and concerned about what US had done and how Taliban had come back. It was a golden opportunity for Pakistan. Right? So this was a massive crisis for India. The only dialogue that we got involved in was in the Moscow process. Russia had conducted its own parallel talks. In fact, all other countries were smart enough to realize what will happen. So they all struck their own deals with Taliban, except for India. From European countries to Iran, to Russia, to China. All these countries, they forgot the past and they negotiated directly with Taliban to protect their interests. Even Russia, which at one point opposed Taliban, directly held talks with Taliban, but Russia had the courtesy to invite India. India did take part. We sent few diplomats only to observe and engage, but not talk to Taliban. We didn't talk to Taliban even then. Even when it was clear that Americans are quitting and Taliban will come back, even then India held back and we didn't talk to Taliban directly. See, it's a dilemma. It's a very challenging situation for India. Because for India, Taliban has been a terrorist organization. Whereas others look at Taliban as a radical political insurgent group. Taliban is not a major threat for others, but for India, it's a major threat. We know Taliban has been used by Pakistan to shelter terror groups that target India. Right? So how can India work with a group like Taliban? How can we recognize them? How can we talk to them? But at the same time, if you're too idealistic, if you keep sticking to an ideal line that Taliban is a terror group, you will never see the realistic approach. Realistically, we should have reached out to Taliban long ago, just like Russia did, just like Iran did, just like China did. We should have struck our own deal to protect our interests because India had a lot to offer to Taliban as well. Things were different right now. Taliban was also looking for recognition. Right? Taliban had learned from its previous mistakes. Previously, most governments didn't recognize Taliban. So now it would crave recognition. And that too from a major democratic country like India. Right? That would be a huge boon for Taliban. We should have used that as a leverage to distance Taliban from Pakistan much earlier. But India faced this challenge. We held back. Even at Moscow process, we didn't talk to Taliban directly. We simply participated. So by September 2021, it was too late. The Americans had quit, Taliban had taken over, captured the country, and a massive crisis had already begun. And we had no contact, no ties with Taliban whatsoever. Is that clear? So India's priority was to deal with refugees and evacuation of Indians from the country. That's what all countries focused upon. We shut our embassy, we shut all our consulates. In fact, from 2 years before itself, we had removed our diplomats from our consulates because Indian embassy and consulates have been attacked multiple times. You should know about this. A terror group known as Haqqani Network, which is a terror group controlled by Pakistan's ISI, has carried out multiple attacks against Indian missions and diplomats. In order to counter Indian influence and to derail Indian projects and investments, Pakistan had used Haqqani Network to target India. It's one of the factions of Afghan Taliban. It's one of the branches of Afghan Taliban. It operates along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border in the tribal areas near Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So Pakistan had repeatedly used this terror group to attack Indian embassy in Kabul, our consulates at Jalalabad and Mazar-e-Sharif. Many Indian diplomats have been killed. Indian intelligence officers have been killed by this terror group. Indian workers were kidnapped and killed who were executing all these key projects. So Haqqani Network has always been a major threat. Is that clear? So India obviously believed that if Taliban comes back, there is a direct threat to our officials, to our people there. So just like every other country, we started focusing on evacuating our people and taking some Afghan refugees as well, who were close friends of India. Right? Our friends in Afghan government, Afghan security forces and intelligence agencies, they had to be rescued, or else they'll all be killed by Taliban when it comes to power. So we conducted an evacuation operation known as Operation Devi Shakti. Under Operation Devi Shakti, Indian Air Force quickly pulled out all the Indian nationals, Indian diplomats, some Afghan refugees, right? All of them were brought back safely, and we shut down our diplomatic missions. We closed our embassy and consulates permanently, and we cut off all ties with Afghanistan. So this became a setback for India, right? Our biggest concern was the investments we had made, $3 billion worth of investments. It was critical for our ties with Iran, critical for our ties with Central Asia, critical to counter Pakistan and terrorism. All of this was lost because we had failed to implement a realistic approach. Realistically, we should have talked to Taliban much earlier because others had already done that. This was no longer 1990s. The era was different. Taliban would also look for recognition, right? India had the influence as well to build its own ties and move Taliban away from Pakistan's influence. We could have promised funds, assistance. We could have promised recognition, right? In return, Taliban would protect Indian interests, not allow Pakistan to breed terrorism. Such a deal should have been worked out earlier, but it was complex. You can't blame the government entirely because Haqqani Network, which was founded by Jalaluddin Haqqani. Jalaluddin Haqqani founded this notorious terror group. Now it is headed by his son, Sirajuddin Haqqani. All right, in 1990s, his father, Jalaluddin Haqqani, founded this terror outfit with the help of ISI. Now his son looks after this terror group, and it's Sirajuddin Haqqani who has targeted the Indian embassy consulates, killed Indian diplomats, Indian officers, and Indian workers in the country. Sirajuddin Haqqani is a UN designated terrorist. He's designated by the UN Security Council as a global terrorist. And now he became the interior minister, basically the home minister of the Taliban government. Now imagine how difficult it is for India to talk to such elements. He's a globally wanted terrorist designated by UN Sanctions Committee. India holds him directly responsible for attacks against Indian missions, against Indian projects, for killing Indian officials. Now we are forced to talk to them, talk to the government, where Sirajuddin Haqqani is a home minister. So obviously it's a big dilemma for India. But again, you have to be realistic. You have to keep ideals away, principles away, and we should have engaged with Taliban much before they took over. Because when Taliban took over, we had no leverage. Russians had struck a deal to protect their interests. Iranians had struck a deal, right? Saudi Arabia, then all European powers, China, they had all struck their deals with Taliban to protect their interests except for India. But fortunately, after the Taliban takeover, India started reaching out. We had no other option. We had to reach out. So through Qatar, the Indian ambassador for the first time officially met with Taliban at Doha. Is that clear? The Indian ambassador to Qatar was finally asked to meet Taliban officially in official capacity. This was the first time we were directly engaging with Taliban in Qatar, in Doha. Following this, we started sending some assistance. We sent food grains and other support was given to help the Afghan people. There was massive food shortage. There were disasters that happened later. There was an earthquake, there were floods. So during these incidents, India started supplying assistance. And luckily, Pakistan allowed these food grains to be sent via Pakistani territory. We worked with World Food Program and UN. We worked with the World Food Program and United Nations. And Pakistan allowed the shipments to pass through its territory. And we sent several truckloads of food grains, especially wheat and other essential food items, and even gave disaster support when Afghanistan was recently hit by earthquakes and floods. So our intention was to help the Afghan people and in a way reach out to Taliban as well. And now India has reopened the embassy. We have reopened embassy. We have established direct contact with Taliban. We have started direct negotiations with Taliban. Nothing concrete has come out of it yet, but we are talking to Taliban right now. Right? We reached out at Qatar, sent assistance several times whenever Afghan people needed the assistance. So thus we built an equation with Taliban, and now we have reopened the embassy that had been shut. Indian diplomats have been sent back. All right? And we have established direct contact and we are directly talking to Taliban leaders. Whether we like it or not, previously we may have seen Taliban as a terrorist outfit. Yes, it has nurtured terror groups. They have attacked Indian interests. They have killed Indian people. But right now you have to set them aside because things have changed. Most governments have recognized, at least if not given official recognition, no country has officially recognized Taliban government, but they've established their own deals. They've struck deals with Taliban. They have protected their interests. Officially, no country has recognized the government, the Taliban government, but they've struck agreements and deals to protect their interests. So India also has to do the same. There's no other option. So now India is reaching out to Taliban and talks are taking place. We are more open towards Taliban today compared to before. Right? That is how things have changed and transformed. And this could potentially give us an opportunity. Right? Because today, something else has happened. Today, there is a difference that has come up between Afghan Taliban and Pakistan. Now, this could potentially benefit India. Right? See, Afghan Taliban is already looking for recognition. What better recognition than getting it from India, from a large democratic power like India? They crave recognition. All right? Plus, they know India can bring assistance. We can bring money. We can give them funds, execute key projects. So there is that leverage with India. And parallelly, Afghan Taliban has got problems with Pakistan right now. What is the problem? The problem has to do with the TTP, the Pakistan Taliban that we were discussing. Pakistan Taliban now has support in Afghan territory. The Pakistan Taliban, that is TTP, it has revived itself after Afghan Taliban took over in Afghanistan, and it has escalated terror attacks against Pakistani state. Prior to this, Afghan Taliban had struck a deal between both of them. Afghan Taliban had made a deal with Pakistan and TTP. It had convinced TTP not to carry out terror attacks against Pakistan and convinced Pakistan not to attack TTP. Such a deal had been worked out last year. All right. Then what happened? TTP broke the deal. TTP, for various reasons, has broken the deal, and it has started carrying out major attacks in the last 8 months against Pakistan. And Pakistan is blaming Afghan Taliban for sheltering the TTP. Because they are connected. Afghan and Pakistan Taliban, they are brothers. They are linked to each other. They do have support in Afghan territory, and Afghan Taliban is not acting against them. So what Pakistan has done, it has carried out air strikes and military strikes in the border areas, that too on Afghan soil. Obviously, Afghan Taliban will be pissed. They'll not be happy with it, right? Afghan sovereignty is being breached by Pakistan. So to target the TTP, Pakistani Air Force and Army have launched operations in the border areas, conducting attacks and strikes across the border in Afghanistan. This has led to the rise of divisions and differences between Afghan Taliban and Pakistan for the first time. Potentially, if India can work this around, we can leverage these differences and get closer to Afghan Taliban to protect our interests. What is our interest? We have only two interests here. Very simple. Remember this. Our first biggest interest is the security interest. Ensure that anti-India terror groups don't get support. Ensure that Pakistan does not misuse Afghan territory against India. This is the security priority for us. Ensure that the Afghan Taliban government does not give space for ISI and Pak army to shelter and nurture these anti-India terror groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, like Jaish-e-Mohammed. Second big interest is our investments. Protect our investments and provide us connectivity, because it's a top priority for us to link with Central Asia via Iran and Afghanistan. This connectivity is crucial for Indian interests. We've already put a lot of money and effort behind this. We can't let this go to waste, right? If Taliban can promise these two commitments, right, that is more than enough for India. In return, we can give them assistance, give them funds, give them recognition if needed, if other countries also recognize later, right? And work out a relationship, maintain basic ties, thereby keeping Pakistan away, which will protect our core interests. So this basically completes my detailed discussion of Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the whole region. I know we have taken a lot of time. Trust me, it is necessary. These are complex topics. You need to get that insight. You have to understand this in depth and in detail. If I don't give you the background, if I don't explain all this, you'll never understand the details related to this topic. You can expect mains questions, right? UPSC might ask you to explain the impact of Taliban takeover in Afghanistan on Indian interests. UPSC might ask you to explain Indian investments in Afghanistan and how they have been threatened by Taliban's takeover. There might be a question on how India-Pakistan rivalry has played out in Afghanistan, right? Or why Afghanistan is crucial for our ties with Central Asian countries. So all such questions can be anticipated. All right? Or UPSC might ask you to critically examine and evaluate the Doha agreement between US and Taliban and how it affects Indian interests. All these are potential questions, and you cannot answer them without all these details. I hope you guys have understood everything. Now I'll take you through two projects. That's the last topic for today. We can end the session after that. I'll take your doubts and questions and we can wrap up for today. Let me show you some important projects in this region that involve India, and potentially there is an opportunity to include Afghanistan and Pakistan as well to bring better opportunities for the whole region. These projects are important for your prelims. You should know the alignment, the route of these projects, and how it might help our relations with Pakistan and Afghanistan. The first one is INSTC project, the International North-South Transport Corridor. This was proposed in 1990s. The idea was proposed in 1990s, and now it is being revived. There is renewed discussion. There is a renewed interest in this major connectivity project that is led by India. India is one of the key participants in this connectivity project. See, this project aims to create a shorter and more efficient route between India and Russia. Because currently the trade route between India and Russia is a very long, circuitous route. Currently, if we have to send goods from India to Russia or get goods from Russia to India, the most preferred route is this blue line that you see. Goods have to go through Arabian Sea, then pass through Gulf of Aden, pass through this choke point, which is Bab al-Mandeb Strait. Bab al-Mandeb is a narrow strait. It's a choke point that connects Gulf of Aden with Red Sea. This is the Red Sea. Red Sea is extremely crucial to connect Indian Ocean with Europe. Right? For trade between Europe and Asia, Red Sea, Bab al-Mandeb Strait and Gulf of Aden are critical. This is the most preferred shipping route. But the problem is there are many choke points. Like Bab al-Mandeb is a choke point. Red Sea itself is very, very narrow, and there are countries which are unstable around it. Right? There are civil wars going on in Yemen, in Sudan. There are terror groups present that are operating here. So all of this is a threat for shipping in this region. Then you have another major choke point over here at the top of Red Sea, where it connects with Mediterranean Sea. Do you know what is this choke point? This choke point that I have marked, can you let me know in the comments? I'm marking it in green. There is another major choke point present here. What is it? Very good. It is the Suez Canal in Egypt. The artificial man-made canal in Egypt. It connects Red Sea with Mediterranean Sea. So all these are choke points, and there are many threats present here for shipping. So from here, the goods reach the Atlantic. This is the Atlantic. And then crosses to the North Sea, across Western Europe, and reaches the Baltic Sea to connect with Russia. Look at how long this route is. It takes several days for shipments to arrive from India to Russia and Russia to India. The cost is higher. The time required is more. It affects the businesses. Logistics are affected. So India and Russia have been pursuing a shorter route, an alternate route to bypass these choke points, to reduce dependency on Suez Canal and Bab al-Mandeb Strait. So one of the projects proposed is INSTC project. It also involves Iran, Azerbaijan, and many other countries have shown interest. A total of 13 countries in this region have shown interest in this project. But the primary countries are India, Iran, Azerbaijan, and Russia. The route passes through these 4 countries. But other countries around the region, like Central Asian countries, then Turkey, Azerbaijan, and its neighbors, right? They've also shown interest to be a part of it. But primarily, these are the 4 involved in this corridor. The plan is to build a maritime link, to have a strong maritime link between India and Iran, not just to connect with Chabahar port that we have built, but also to connect with Bandar Abbas, which is another major Iranian port. Iran has 2 major ports towards the Hormuz Strait, towards Arabian Sea and Persian Gulf. It is Chabahar port built by India and Bandar Abbas. So we want to connect with these ports and then use road and rail infrastructure of Iran to bring the goods to this region. What is this region? This white colored region that I highlighted? Does anyone know? I'll mark it in green so it will stand out. What is this region? Any idea? Good. Many of you know the answer. Very good. This is the Caspian Sea. It's a locked water body. It's not a real sea. It's actually a lake. Is that clear? It's a large endorheic lake surrounded by land on all the sides. It's not an open sea, but it's a massive water body. It is shared between multiple countries. Iran, Azerbaijan, Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan and Russia, they all have access to Caspian Sea. So on the Caspian Sea, inland navigation already exists. So goods can be taken via ships from Iran to Azerbaijan to Russia, and eventually it will land in Russia. We can further expand this route to connect with Europe, to connect with Central Asia, and potentially we can extend the route to connect with Afghanistan and Pakistan as well. If things improve, if the situation and the relations improve, right? India, Russia, Iran can convince Afghanistan, Pakistan also to join the corridor, which will provide an opportunity for improving economic relations and diplomatic relations. Is that clear? It's one of the major connectivity projects, but it has never seen progress because there are many challenges. There are many challenges to this project. The biggest challenge has been India-Iran relations. There have been tensions in India-Iran relations. We'll understand this later. I'll not explain now. Later, we'll come to West Asia. I'll explain India-Iran relations. So there you'll understand why our relations have been affected in the recent past. Then the sanctions on Russia. Russia's war in Ukraine is another major factor. Since many years, Russia is under sanctions of Western countries, and the war in Ukraine has escalated tensions and Russia has been isolated. So it's very difficult for India to work with Russia on such projects right now. So there are many challenges to execute this. It has been delayed for many years, but still there is potential. Maybe in the future, if things become better, if these issues are sorted, we can execute this project, bring all other countries as well. There are many countries in West Asia, Central Asia, and Eurasia which are interested in this. So this could become a major connectivity project that involves major involvement from India. India would be a lead country in this project, right? So please know about INSTC corridor. Next, we have a pipeline project called TAPI pipeline. It connects Turkmenistan with Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. So it stands for TAPI. TAPI is an acronym. It represents the countries that are part of it. T for Turkmenistan, A for Afghanistan, P for Pakistan, I for India. Now, please note that Turkmenistan, being a Central Asian country, it is blessed with hydrocarbon reserves, especially natural gas reserves. It has one of the world's largest natural gas reserves, the fourth largest to be specific. The Galinish natural gas field that you see here in the map is a prized asset in Central Asia. Many countries are interested to exploit the natural gas from here. And Turkmenistan is a very good friend of India. In fact, all Central Asian countries are good friends of India. Even Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan, they are also very close to India. So India, Turkmenistan have worked with Afghanistan and Pakistan. And US also backed this project initially. So under the support of United States, these countries worked out a pipeline project to transport natural gas from Galinish field of Turkmenistan to Afghanistan and Pakistan and then to India. Please remember the alignment as well. The pipeline connects major Afghan cities like Herat, Kandahar, then connects Quetta in Pakistan and Multan. Both are in Pakistan, Quetta and Multan, and lands at Fazilka in Punjab. On the Indian side, in the state of Punjab, you have Fazilka, which is a town on the Pakistan border. This is where the pipeline is supposed to end. So it will take the natural gas from Turkmenistan, supply that to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. It will basically solve the energy problems. It will provide for energy security for all these countries. It will boost economic ties. It could also create an opportunity for friendly relations between these countries, because all of them have energy deficiency. India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, they all have a requirement for natural gas. So that is why US supported and backed the project. All right. It was believed that it will help in the reconstruction of Afghanistan. US hoped that this project will revive Afghan economy with India's involvement. That is why it pushed this project. All right. But unfortunately, the project has been stuck. The project is partially completed and it has been stuck since the Taliban takeover. Part of the pipeline has been completed. In Afghanistan and Pakistan, part of it has been completed, but the full pipeline is not ready. Before it could be completed, the Taliban took over, and there is uncertainty over this project. See, India always had concerns about this. We were actually hesitant to join this initiative because look at the alignment. It's passing through Kandahar, which is a hub of Taliban. We knew that terror groups will be a threat. Pakistan itself is a problem in this project. If relations are not good between India and Pakistan might shut off the pipeline, or it might use terror groups to target the pipeline deliberately to punish India. So India was always hesitant to join this project. But US pushed this project on India as it forced India to abandon another pipeline, which is the IPI project. Many years ago, around 2006, 2008, India was more interested in IPI pipeline. That is Iran, Pakistan, India pipeline. We were actually interested in this project. This was safer because it was an underwater pipeline. It would pass under Arabian Sea. So even Pakistan would find it difficult to sabotage or destroy the pipeline or block the supplies. It was more reliable, more safer for India to source source gas from Iran, right? And Pakistan was also interested. So IPI project was a priority for India. But since US had problems with Iran over its nuclear weapons program, and as it imposed economic sanctions on Iran, it forced India to drop this project. The US forced India to drop the project and instead offered Tapi pipeline as a compensation. We were never comfortable with Tapi because it passes via land. It passes through Taliban stronghold areas. It passes through Baloch areas where there are multiple terror outfits controlled by Taliban, controlled by Pakistan's ISI. We always knew Pakistan could meddle, disrupt the supplies. We were never interested initially. Our focus was on IPI project, but because of American pressure, because of their issues with Iran, the sanctions that they imposed, US forced India to quit IPI and instead offered Tapi pipeline as a compensation. But still, India was hopeful that the project will succeed. Right now, it has been delayed, it has been stuck because of Taliban's takeover. But still, it has the potential. It still has great opportunity to revive economic relations between these countries and improve relations as well between these countries. Now, coming to the last project, the Ashgabat Agreement. The last point, and we'll end the class after this. Ashgabat Agreement is another transport corridor of this region. First proposed in 2011 to connect few Central Asian countries with West Asian countries and Persian Gulf. This is the primary purpose of the project. It's a multimodal transport corridor involving multiple modes of transportation. It will include roadway projects, railway projects, pipelines, etc. It will even have a maritime link. All right. And it includes few Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan, for example, Tajikistan, right? Uzbekistan. These countries have shown interest. So these Central Asian countries, they want to connect with Iran and link with Oman. Actually, Qatar was also part of it initially, but later Qatar has quit due to differences with other countries. Qatar has walked out of this project. So the plan is to link some Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan and others, which are blessed with resources. They have plenty of resources. The plan is to connect them with Iran through a mix of connectivity projects and link with Oman and Persian Gulf to form this transport corridor. So recently, India and Pakistan have also joined the Ashgabat Agreement. India was also interested in this corridor. So from South Asia, India, Pakistan have joined this initiative. So this corridor has the potential to link West Asian countries and Central Asian countries with South Asia. Right? It will help us tap the resources in Central Asia and Iran and West Asia. It will help us make investments in these countries and promote our influence as well. So now that India, Pakistan are part of this agreement, there is an opportunity here, an opportunity to focus on economic projects and relations and improve our bilateral relations as well. Right? But again, due to various challenges and issues, even this has not progressed. Right? Due to India-Iran issues, issues between the other members, issues between India, Pakistan, they've all delayed this initiative as well. But still, it has great potential to drive connectivity in this region. It can bring Central Asia closer to West Asia and South Asia. Right? It can provide an opportunity for India, Pakistan to work together to focus on economic initiatives and try to address the tensions in the relationship. So that's why I feel that these projects are very, very important as far as India, Pakistan and India, Afghanistan relations are concerned. Is that clear? So please be aware of all these connectivity projects. Along with this, we've already discussed the Chabahar Port project, the highway that India has built in Afghanistan. Right? We'll discuss more of this under Central Asia, under West Asia as well. So you'll get a fair idea as to what kind of investments India has been making in this region. All right. So on this note, I would like to bring my discussion to an end. But let's see some questions, some doubts, and after that, we can wrap up today's session. Janvi is asking why India has to listen to US with regard to TAPI project. Because see, US is a major power. We have sought good, close relations with US, and it has the ability to exert pressure on India. As a superpower, it can put that pressure on India, even though we follow an independent foreign policy, right? We have never followed America's sanctions. But in the case of Iran, there has been a lot of pressure on India. The previous Manmohan Singh government found a way out of it. It had bypassed the American sanctions and continued the close ties with Iran. Even the Modi government was continuing the close ties with Iran, but under pressure from Donald Trump, India was forced to follow the American sanctions and we cut off oil trade with Iran. So there have been a lot of ups and downs in India-Iran relations. We will study that under West Asia. We'll come to that chapter next week. So there I'll explain more about how American pressure has affected India-Iran relations. Since US has a lot of influence on India, leverage on India, it did put a lot of pressure on multiple occasions to force India to scale back its ties with Iran. All right. So sometimes we have bypassed the American pressure. We have sidestepped that pressure. We have continued our close ties with Iran sometimes, but Sometimes we have fallen under American pressure as well. Sahil is asking why Pakistan Taliban targets Pakistan army. Because Pakistan Taliban has a different agenda. The TTP's motive is to form a Islamic caliphate, to establish an Islamic emirate, just like Afghan Taliban. Right? TTP has a similar ideology to Afghan Taliban. Now, Afghan Taliban has succeeded in throwing Afghan government out and forming Islamic emirate, and it is enforcing a rigid Sharia law. That is the exact vision of TTP as well. Pakistan Taliban from the beginning has a direct opposition to the Pakistani state. It wants to throw the Pakistani army, the government out and capture control and form a caliphate to establish Sharia law. So that is what drives their ideology. That is the prime motivation of TTP. Avni is asking why economic sanctions have not been put on Taliban similar to Myanmar. See, when Taliban took over in 2021, all its foreign accounts have been frozen. All the countries, right, including US, they have frozen all the Afghan accounts held abroad. So Taliban cannot access those funds. So in a way, limited sanctions have applied. But US has not brought broad-based sanctions on Afghanistan because obviously they struck a deal with Taliban. In a way, they allowed Taliban to take over the country. Right? That was the terms of the deal, to allow US to exit the country. So as of now, there have not been sanctions either through FATF. Afghanistan has not been blacklisted because there's no government as well, right? The interim government of Taliban is not recognized by anyone. And Taliban is not part of FATF. It's not part of UN. So enforcement becomes a challenge as well. Plus, US has struck this deal where it has allowed Taliban to capture power. But some limited sanctions have applied, like all the foreign accounts of Afghan government that existed. They've all been frozen, so the Taliban cannot access these funds. So please compare and contrast relations between Taliban and northern tribes. See, Taliban is mainly made up of Pashtuns, right? Taliban is a byproduct of the Afghan Mujahideen, which was primarily formed by the Pashtuns from southern Afghanistan. So Pashtuns are the major ethnic group, the major ethnic tribe from southern Afghanistan and parts of Pakistan. Whereas the northern parts of Afghanistan, towards the Hindu Kush, you have several northern tribes like Tajiks, Uzbeks, and others. So historically, there is a rivalry, there is a competition between these ethnic groups. Pashtuns have always been opposed, resisted by the northern tribes. Is that clear? This has existed since centuries. So in modern times, if Mujahideen and Taliban were backed by Pakistan, naturally the northern tribes were backed by the rivals of Pakistan, like India, Russia, and Iran. So northern tribes, they opposed Taliban's rule. Even in 2021, when Taliban took over the power again in Afghanistan, Northern Alliance under Ahmad Shah Massoud's son, they again raised an opposition, but eventually they were defeated. In the Panjshir Valley, Ahmad Shah Massoud's son, he again raised the opposition and he gave a call to fight Taliban's occupation. But this time Taliban was much stronger and countries weren't willing to support Northern Alliance. So very quickly the opposition has died out. Mohammed is asking, sir, under Ashgabat agreement, India will be committed to build the route only till Iran, or should we invest in combined initiatives for member countries? See, under Ashgabat agreement, the details are not clear. The countries still haven't worked out what kind of projects they'll build, who will contribute how much. Those terms are not very clear. They've not finalized all those details. The basic foundation has been laid, but further negotiations are needed between these countries to take forward these projects. They have to come up with detailed plans, come up with the fund allocation, the alignment. All of that is still pending. Is that clear? So there's no clarity on that. But of course, in any such project involving multiple countries, they will share the cost. They will contribute the technical resources as well, and they will contribute financial resources. So that division has to be worked out. Priyanshu is asking why US got distracted in Iraq. No, US got distracted in Afghanistan by fighting an unnecessary war in Iraq. In Iraq, there were no WMDs. Saddam Hussein was not building weapons of mass destruction. That war was fought on false intelligence, right? US and UK, their motivation was to remove Saddam Hussein from power, to cause regime change, to topple the Iraqi government. So they created false intelligence, invaded the country, fought an unnecessary war for 10 years. And as a result, they got distracted in Afghanistan, right? Their attention, resources were diverted. This was an unnecessary illegal war, right? Which allowed Taliban to revive and carry out a resurgence. All right. So guys, these are the questions. So let's end the session with this. Tomorrow, as I told you, is a holiday on account of the festival. So we'll meet again on Friday. We'll start with the next module. We'll take up India-China relations and we'll proceed to talk about Indian Ocean region. Don't forget, Saturday, we'll have an extra class from 6 a.m. in the morning till around 11 p.m. 11 a.m. Sorry. Right. So Friday, we'll have a regular evening class. Saturday, an early morning class from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. Kindly remember this. Tomorrow, we don't have a class. It's a holiday. So that's it from my side. I hope today's class was good. I hope you guys have enjoyed what we have discussed. I hope it was interesting. So I'll see you back on Friday. Till then, a great Krishna Janmashtami for all of you. Happy festival. And let's catch up on Friday again. So till then, good night. Take care.